Okay, nobody's waiting for you.
You all lonely over there on that side?
You see it now? I'm ready if you are.
Yes. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 17th, 2023 meeting of the City of Pacifica Planning Commission. The meeting is called to order. May I please have a roll call?
Commissioner Ferguson.
Present.
Commissioner Godwin.
Present.
Vice Chair Hauser.
Present.
Commissioner Leal.
Present.
Commissioner Wright.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Wright, can you please lead us in a salute to the flag?
Surely. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Okay. Before we get into administrative business, I want to make an announcement that Comcast is having technical issues today. So today the broadcast will not be available on channels 26 or 27. However, this meeting can be watched on the live stream on the city's website, which is www.cityofpacifica.org. And then any member of the public wishing to make public comment on this agenda should complete a speaker card and bring it to the front and hand it to staff. On the card, please indicate the agenda item number on which you wish to comment, or oral communications for items not on the agenda. There is also a dial-in option for making public comment. The phone number is 650-898-6965. You should also see this on your screen. Once dialed in, enter conference number 383-609-442, and then press the pound key. Once I have announced the public comment opportunity for the item on which you wish to comment, press star 5 to raise your hand. City staff will then identify you by the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. Once identified for your turn to speak, press star 6 to unmute yourself, wait a few seconds, and then begin speaking. Be sure to mute any other broadcast you may be watching, such as the live stream. Also, dial-in instructions are shown on the screen, and I will call each speaker, whether in person or by dial-in, for their public comment opportunity. Moving on to administrative business. Approval of the order of agenda. Can I get a motion on the approval of the order of agenda?
Madam Chair, can we confirm with staff whether anyone's dialed in to make public comment on the administrative items?
Sure.
Vice Chair, there are no comments at this time for dial-in.
Thank you. Commissioner Leal.
I'll make a motion to approve the order of tonight's agenda.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Commissioner Wright seconded it. May we have a vote?
And that motion passes unanimously.
Okay. I don't believe we have any minutes tonight. Is that right, Director Murdoch?
Correct.
Okay. And I don't believe we have a designation of liaison to City Council. Is that still correct?
Correct.
Fabulous. Okay, that wraps up our administrative business. Oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. Do we have anybody who is here to speak on something that's not on the agenda?
There are no dial-ins at this time.
Okay, thank you. And the speaker card I have is for item number 1. So I think with that, do I need to close public comment, City Attorney? Yes, okay, I'll close public comment. We don't have any consent items tonight, so we'll go right into new public hearings. The first item on our agenda is file number 2016-001, rezoning RZ-210-22, development plan DP-86-22, specific plan SP-179-22, core use permit UP-71-16, variance PV 531-22, tree permit TP-1-22, and certification and adoption of a final environmental impact report, EIR. May we have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Honorable Commissioners. I am Planning Director Christian Murdoch. Following public notice for the public hearing that you just announced, staff discussed the matter with the project applicant and discussed the scheduling of the item and reached mutual agreement to continue the item, seeking Planning Commission approval for that tonight to continue the public hearing to March 6th, 2023.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the commissioners have questions on the continuance that's being proposed by staff tonight? Okay. With that, I'm going to open the public comment for item 1. And I'd like to remind everybody who's listening or in the audience here that if you do have public comment on item 1, to please limit it specifically to the continuance. The recommendation from staff on this one is to continue this item to March 6, 2023. Are there any other speaker cards besides this one? All right. So Owen, excuse me if I mispronounced your name, Owen Brisges, you are the first speaker and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'll be out of the country on March 6th, so I'm going to give my comments at this point. My first point was the final EIR has not been, I have not seen that. My wife and I have made comments, and I think it's very important for this commission to understand those comments and how they've been addressed in the final EIR, because I feel they are very important. The second point is when I first reviewed the documents and the EIR, I was struck by the scope of the project and how reclamation of the quarry, the solution was going to be trucking in 1 million cubic yards of material and refilling the hollowed out mountain or hill that is the Rockaway Quarry. It didn't make any sense to me logically, financially. If the goal is to make the quarry usable, there are less impactful alternatives to improve trail access and make the site constructible. And the alternative that was shown was out of proportion. I then did some more reading, read the appendix, and it was now understood that what is being proposed is an industrial landfill in Pacifica. The communities of Sunnyvale, Cupertino, San Francisco, the naval shipyards are trying to redevelop old, contaminated sites, and they need to get rid of this contamination. It's in the soil. They can't, you can't economically extract this contamination for the soil. So the way to get rid of it is to ship it to a landfill. Ox Mountain in Half Moon Bay, Newbie Island in Milpitas, and then there's one down, I can't remember, in the Central Valley. Usually it's trucked down there and disposed of. What's being proposed here is the contractor is creating the soil management plan. He's creating the criteria of what is acceptable to put in this location. So there's, PFAS, there's lead, there's petroleum products that are allowed in that. He is doing the testing, and then for 4 years is bringing this material into Pacifica and creating an unsafe condition. So actually making the quarry not more safe or more usable, less usable. So I encourage this commission to read those comments, understand the document, ask me any questions, and pay a special attention to Appendix C and D. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers in the audience on item 1? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to phone callers. Okay. Do we have anyone on the phone? And I'd like to remind those who wish to speak to press star 5 to raise your hand.
There are no call-ins at this time.
Okay. Let's give it about 10 more seconds, and if there are still no callers, we'll close the public comment period.
Chair Hauser, I did want to remark, PCTV advised that due to the live stream only broadcast tonight for those not in the council chambers, the period of delay is actually longer than the typical delay on the cable broadcast, so
Sure.
adding additional time for any dial-in callers is advisable.
Is there an estimate of how much time would be advisable?
I don't know, but I think the suggestion earlier was, several additional seconds to allow that additional.
Sure. Okay. Well, we'll give it another 30 seconds then. Thank you. All right.
Chair, there are no comments at this time for call-in.
Okay, with that, I will close the public comment for item 1. Any deliberation by commissioners? Commissioner Leal.
I'm ready to make a motion. I move that we continue the public hearing to the regular Planning Commission meeting on March 6, 2023.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second the motion.
Okay. May we have a vote, please?
And that motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item 2 of the agenda, file number 2022-036, text amendment TA-123-122, initiated by the City of Pacifica to repeal and replace Article 49, short-term rentals of the City of Pacifica zoning regulations, Title 9, Chapter 4 of the Pacifica Municipal Code to establish a cap of 150 short-term rental permits issued citywide and various other conforming amendments, and finding the text amendment exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. May we have a presentation, please?
Yes, and good evening, Planning Commissioners. I am Senior Planner Bonnie O'Connor. Tonight I will be presenting item 2, which is the proposed text amendment to the short-term rental program. The term short-term rental, or STR, refers to the use of all or a portion of a residential dwelling unit for a rental of less than 30 consecutive days. In 2018, the city adopted an ordinance to establish a permit requirement for operation of an STR, which included certain operating requirements and a permit revocation and enforcement process. The permitting requirements established in the ordinance also include certain guest safety standards, including fire safety standards, permittee, contact information requirements, city noise and social host liability information, and information that must be provided to guests before and during visits. On June 13, 2022, city staff provided a comprehensive update to council on the implementation of the city's STR program. At that meeting, staff provided a detailed report on the implementation of the STR program, which included information regarding the STR locations in Pacifica, the TOTs collected from STRs, and the impacts of STRs on the city's housing stock. The City Council did not direct any changes to the STR program, but did direct that potential revisions to the STR program be revisited during the Council's goal setting in 2023. Following the June 13th, 2022 meeting, City Council members of the public expressed their concerns related to the sale of residential properties in Pacifica for the singular purpose of using the property as an STR. On October 10th, 2022, staff presented to council information about residential property sales resulting in subsequent STR use and asked for direction on whether amendments to the STR regulations were warranted. At the meeting, a majority of the council provided direction to amend the STR program regulations to impose a cap of 150 total STRs permits issued in Pacifica, and that further potential revisions to the STR program may be revisited during the council goal setting in 2023. Therefore, tonight, I propose to you a text amendment that would revise various sections of Article 49, the short-term rental article, of the Pacifica Municipal Code. The text amendments would include adding definitions for permit, permittee, and short-term rental permit cap, adding a new section that would establish a cap of 150 STR permits. This section would also identify that a waitlist would be created for applications received after the issuance of 150 STR permits. Language would also be added to clarify that no STR shall operate within a JADU. This is an existing provision that is detailed in the JADU section of the Pacifica Municipal Code and would supplement similar existing language related to ADUs in the short-term rental article. Finally, the text amendment would change the stated expiration date of STR permits to October 31st from December 31st, which mirrors the city's expiration date for all business licenses. This will align currently inconsistent deadlines for permittees, which are required to get a business license renewed for an STR permit 2 months before they are required to get an STR permit. The proposed text amendments would not impact any of the existing STR permit application standards, STR operation requirements, or implementation of the STR revocation and enforcement provisions. The amendment would require California Coastal Commission certification to make the amendment in effect in the coastal zone. The California Coastal Commission has found that outright bans or undue restrictions on STRs are inconsistent with the Coastal Act policies prioritizing public access and visitor-serving uses. The city recognizes that the coastal zone contains a majority of Pacifica's existing visitor accommodations. These broad accommodation types suit the needs of various size groups and budgetary levels for the city's visitors. The proposed text amendments would support the broad visitor accommodation types provided under the currently permitted STRs in the coastal zone, and the proposed text amendments would not remove the existing permitted STRs in the coastal zone unless the operator voluntarily decided not to timely renew their permit. Therefore, this amendment would not be an outright ban or create undue restrictions on STRs in the coastal zone. The Coastal Commission has also recognized the need to restrict STRs where evidence shows that the STR market was significantly impacting the availability of housing stock or having other impacts on coastal resources. The city recognizes that the coastal zone contains a proportionate amount of housing units in the coastal zone are permitted STRs, approximately 1.9%, compared to citywide, which is less than 1%. That non-permitted STRs impact the coastal housing stock further, increasing that to 3.2% for permitted and unpermitted STRs. And removing housing units from the coastal zone, even temporarily, at a greater pace than development of new long-term housing conflicts with the policy of the Pacifica Coastal Land Use Plan and General Plan, including the Pacifica housing element. One public comment was received prior to publication and is included in the staff report. Several more public comment letters regarding this item were received after publication, but before the Planning Commission meeting, and are available online and in the rear of the council chambers. The general themes of the comments include support for the proposed cap, suggested revisions for more provisions on STRs, and a suggested moratorium on STRs. In response to the comments suggesting revisions for more provisions on STRs, as mentioned previously, Council has provided staff direction to cap the STR permits for the time being. There are a number of considerations that the Council has to balance in regards to more detailed STR provisions, and therefore they have expressed their interest to revisit the STR program during the Council goal setting in 2023. In response to the suggested moratorium, this was discussed during the October 10th, 2022 meeting. The city attorney explained at that time that this type of moratorium has an initial duration of 45 days, and to enact the moratorium, the city would have to adopt an ordinance with the findings that there is an immediate threat to public health or safety health, safety, or welfare, which was not clear in the record at the time that those findings could be made. Additionally, the ordinance would have to be readopted every 45 days. Council found that the cap would have a similar effect as the moratorium and therefore provided that direction to staff. In summary, staff recommends that the Planning Commission find the text amendment is exempt from California Environmental Quality Act and adopt the resolution recommending approval of the proposed text amendment to City Council. That concludes my presentation. Assistant Manager Yulia Carter is present tonight to help planning staff answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Does anyone have any questions for staff before we move on to public comment?
I'd like to save my questions for deliberation, if that's all right.
Okay. I had one question, or maybe I have a couple. Looking at the red line that was included in the staff report, so there was something in the staff report that says if a permit covers multiple, or that a permit could cover multiple homes, right? So it's 150 permits and not 150 units of housing. So I guess my question is that what the red line to 9-4.4901D is trying to cover? That's the one that says, however, this value could be an underestimate. Sorry, that's from the staff report. If you look at the section that I quoted, I'm unclear if we're trying to limit permits or units of housing.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear on exactly what.
That's because I didn't say it clearly at all. The staff report is clear that a permit could cover multiple units of housing.
Yes.
So if we limit at 150 permits, it could be 180 homes, potentially. Just an example. So I guess my question is, when you look at the actual resolution that's being proposed, the section that I quoted, which is 9-4.4901D, makes it seem like it is limiting units of housing and not permits. And I'd just like clarification on what we're looking at here.
The intention of that definition is not to address that point. I think the full definition, which reads, permit or short-term rental permit means a permit issued to by the city pursuant to this article to allow the use of a dwelling unit, property, or portion thereof as a short-term rental, is not to limit that permit to just one unit. I think it's to the property of that unit.
So it could be a
and so it could be
duplex.
broader.
Understood. Okay. And then my other question is, if we are creating a wait list and someone does have a permit and they renew their permit, do they get to keep their permit, or are they put at the bottom of the wait list?
They will be able to keep their permit, so they will be, the revisions direct that the renewal be submitted October 1st through October 31st, and so they would have an opportunity to renew their permit before it expires.
Okay.
Therefore, it never becomes available for another person.
And then my last question, and I think you stated this, Ms. O'Connor, but I just want to be 100% certain that I understood, is that what we're reviewing tonight, which will go to council as final approval, is a stopgap measure that has a cap of 150. It does not mean that council would not be discussing this at goal setting and be adding additional items. Is that a correct understanding?
The council made clear when they provided staff this direction that they have full intention of bringing this back for discussion during council goal setting to include it in the other priorities that staff works on, so.
Okay, so it's not one or the other, it's both.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Chair Hauser, I do want to clarify, there's no guarantee that council will place further short-term rental regulation amendments on the work plan for the next fiscal year, but I am very confident the council will carefully consider doing that.
Okay.
But they'll need to weigh that among all of the other priorities and desires that they have for items to be worked on next year, and they'll make that decision as part of the goal-setting process.
Okay, I appreciate that. Commissioner Godwin, did you have something?
Yeah, I had one other interest. It seems from some of the comment letters we've received, there are firms that own a large number of housing units that they're using as STRs in the city, or at least that was asserted. Is there a way of limiting the number of units per company or per group of individuals that could be included in this tonight?
That was a option that was presented to City Council at the October 2022 meeting, that they create a cap of how many STR permits could be issued to a particular person. I think it was recognized that a person could, have their brother or, there's too many loopholes that could be created where the effectiveness of that may not meet their immediate goal of just kind of pausing things for the moment. So they directed us to create a cap. But to answer your question more straightforward, I believe that is a possibility to limit the number of permits per permittee. That wasn't the direction provided to staff, though.
Okay, and there's no simple syndicate rule you could put together to assemble a group of related people? That was your assumption at that time at the city council meeting?
Commissioner Godwin, I'm not sure that there's a simple way to do that. That's an issue, that and essentially the transfer of permits and so on. It's a common issue with various types of regulatory permits. One approach could be the approach that the City Council took with the cannabis permitting ordinance, which sets a single permit allowance for any entity or individual within Pacifica, and then sets thresholds on percentage of ownership by any individual beneficial owner of an entity, for example, an LLC or a corporation, and then sets limits on the ability to transfer that. In the cannabis context, that was about as restrictive and imposing that of a method that we could come up with at that time to help address, fairness, but also highly restricted ownership and transfer. So that's something that could be explored, for example, as part of the more robust regulatory process if the council prioritizes that for next year. But no approach that I'm aware of will be, bulletproof, so to speak, or be without a potential loophole. But there are ways to make a good effort to tamp down on the ability of a single individual or entity having multiple permits.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wright.
I have a quick question for City Attorney. Would it be theoretically possible for somebody to buy one of our large apartment buildings and turn it into a hotel using this ordinance?
Yes, there is the possibility that they could turn units into short-term rentals under the ordinance, but applying through a permit and complying with the requirements in the ordinance. So it would not technically be a hotel, but short-term rental units.
And that would only count as one permit out of the 150, even though it was a large apartment building?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, let's move on to public comment. I'm going to remind folks on the phone that they can press star 5 to raise their hand, and then staff will identify them by the last 4 digits of their phone number. And it looks like some speaker cards are coming through. Thank you. So we're going to call Cindy Abbott first, and then Jim Kramer will be next.
Good evening, Chair Pro Tem Hauser, commissioners, staff, and public. Happy New Year. In June and October, I provided public comment during city council meetings on the issue of short-term rentals. At those meetings, I shared the ongoing and growing impact in West Sharp Park neighborhood where I live as former residential homes, places where there were neighbors who knew each other by name or at least by sight and looked out for each other, and they're disappearing. This is an impact of completely changing neighborhood character and impacting our limited housing stock. I submitted lengthy written public comment to you prior to this evening's meeting. While I appreciate that a proposed cap of 150 units is on tonight's agenda, it is not enough. It is nowhere near enough. There are no provisions included in this update to address the most significant issue of real estate investment businesses that are dominating the short-term rental scene. One example is a company now operating 19 units in Pacifica, up from just 11 a short time ago. They're essentially operating unhosted commercial ventures in our residential neighborhoods. With little concern for the community, we're dealing with a constant flow of unknown people in and out of our residential areas. The public comments also submitted after the meeting packet, but before tonight's meeting, share stories of trash, safety, and other nuisances that are increasing. Today, there's almost no means to address or take enforcement action about these concerns. Pacifica is not alone. Coastal communities and others have completed thorough updates to their short-term rental ordinances. Pacifica needs to follow suit. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't need to take a long time. We can select what's appropriate from similar ordinances and best practice in places such as Santa Cruz or in Half Moon Bay right down the road. We know staff time is precious, and there isn't enough of it in Pacifica or at the Coastal Commission. Monterey County made a decision to their planning commission to not approve an ordinance, 3 actually, that were presented to them because they knew it was not going to address the issue that the community was facing. I'd like you to do the same. I'd like you to pass on this, write a strong recommendation to City Council that they include this in goal setting and prioritize it. In the words of members of the California Coastal Commission from their October 2022 meeting, one commissioner noted, short-term rentals fundamentally undermine coastal communities. And in another, short-term rentals are primarily becoming a zoning change, moving to add business and commercial operations into residential neighborhoods. Please make a strong recommendation to council and not approve this cap. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Kramer, followed by Suzanne Moore.
Good evening. I'm Jim Kramer. I'm a resident of Sharp Park since 2008. Appearances to the contrary, Cindy and I didn't coordinate our presentation. I know Cindy well, and I know what she's been thinking about on some of these issues, but I prepared my own statement. There's going to be some overlap. I have just a few key points to emphasize. Establishing a cap on STRs is a constructive step, but it's seriously insufficient. Second, a cap doesn't help the major problem of STRs, which is the commercialization and the transformation of residential neighborhoods. In some cases, this is being done by large corporations. I heard the statement suggesting that a cap somehow is a pause. Unless the present numbers are approaching 150, not to mention the uncertainties of whether it's permits or residences, how is a cap a pause? I just don't accept that argument. It's not effectively a pause. If you want more time to consider this, you can't have a cap. Pacifica should consider limiting the number of days a year that can be rented short-term. Other cities have done this. And we really must make a registry of such properties. This is really important information so that the public has a way of finding out if this problem property is an STR or just a noisy neighbor. It needs to be public because neighbors themselves can't necessarily find out what's happening at this property down the street. Such a registry does not compromise owner privacy, as has been suggested, and is a reason for not doing a privacy and not doing a public registry. It's just a list of addresses. It doesn't have to say the owner is, doesn't have to give any of that private information. Lastly, I don't think that the CCC actually endorses this use of residential properties in the coastal zone. The STRs are not visitor accommodating uses that the Coastal Commission does support. Cindy just said something like that. In their words, I didn't know that. But I assume that the CCC will speak for themselves. I paraphrased that I don't think that's what they think, but I'm sure you'll hear from them. Finally, I've said a moratorium is not a pause. I support the suggestion of a moratorium. That would give the city a chance to really more fully consider the problem. It really is different from a cap. A moratorium is not the same thing as a cap. If you pass the cap, don't stop here. We somehow have to ensure that we go forward. I'm afraid that passing a cap will make a sense of, oh, well, now we've got some time to rest, and we don't have time to rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne, followed by Caitlin Quinn.
Good evening, Commissioners, and Happy New Year. My name is Suzanne Moore from the Manor District. I'm also a member of Pacifica Housing for All. And thank you for your efforts to advise our community and City Council on the capped short-term rental permits for 150. I do suggest a temporary moratorium. I know that might be onerous, every 45 days, renewing that, but my gosh, this has truly been onerous for our community, and this is an important issue. And it should be returned to council and city staff for further conversation. There are many Pacifica who are in Pacifica who are stakeholders, neighbors who report a quality of life impact due to these STRs, housing advocates who have reports of displacement due to conversions and are concerned about impact on coastal long-term housing stock, and Pacifica motels and hotels who may be negatively impacted. Other communities have studied this issue and have created ordinances to balance community needs. In 2016, a letter to the City of Santa Cruz from the Coastal Commission acknowledges the need to make decisions in consideration of all stakeholders and in compliance with our local coastal plan. Thank you for data provided by HDL. It's a start to a better understanding of the number of STRs, but it's likely that these numbers understate the actual numbers that exist. And a key data point is missing. Without knowing Pacifica's current vacancy rate, we cannot understand the impact that STR conversions have on our housing stock. We do have anecdotal reports of displacement from tenants whose housing were converted to Airbnbs. Pacifica Housing for All and our platform, Pacifica's Housing Elements, suggest a rental registry to best judge STR numbers compared to Pacifica's vacancy rate. And we support restricting STR conversions if Pacifica's vacancy rate is under 5%. We suggest that unhosted annual days for STRs be restricted to 60 days annually. Because of the importance of this issue and the number of involved stakeholders and the interrelationship of an STR ordinance with our local coastal plan, I would really like this discussion to be returned to city staff and city council for further study. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Caitlin Quinn, followed by Dinah Varby.
Good evening. As a 6-year resident of West Shore Park, I want to thank Pacifica's Planning Commission and city staff for addressing the growing issue of short-term rentals in Pacifica. While I support a 150-unit cap for STRs in Pacifica, I respectfully ask that the Commission, City Council, and city staff consider further amendments to the STR ordinance that are critical to protecting Pacifica's neighbors and conserving Pacifica's neighborhoods. While a cap of 150 STRs throughout Pacifica is a good start, it is not going to rescue Pacifica neighborhoods from becoming rows of unregulated hotels, because that has already happened. Unhosted STRs, especially those owned and or operated by corporate investors, are a destabilizing force in Pacifica's neighborhoods. According to the December 27th article in the Pacifica Tribune, 58% of all Pacifica STRs are, quote, operated by hosts with 6 or more short-term rentals. This is a disturbingly high percentage and demonstrates that the majority of STRs in Pacifica are not being operated by neighbors who are simply trying to make ends meet. My partner and I live within a few feet of an STR owned and operated by a corporation with 19 properties in Pacifica. This property is essentially an unregulated hotel, a commercial enterprise that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, including all major holidays. The nuisance issues this unregulated hotel causes us and other adjacent neighbors are myriad. We have had to call the police multiple times because of customers waking us up while loudly checking in and checking out in the middle of the night, including at least 6 times between midnight and 4 a.m. Our sense of personal safety and well-being has significantly diminished. Over the Christmas break, a large group of adults and children woke us up after midnight on Christmas as they were checking into the property. A Pacifica police officer came to our door a few nights later to ask if we had noticed anything suspicious in the Airbnb next door involving children and drugs. I'm going to say that again, involving children and drugs. I am part of a group of 30-plus Pacificans across multiple neighborhoods who seek further help from the city beyond the 150 cap ordinance. Specifically, many of us are eager to see Pacifica adopt Half Moon Bay's recent STR ordinance, which contains the elements that will stop much-needed Pacifica homes from being snatched up by corporate investors who only want to exploit our communities and their resources, that will rescue Pacifica neighborhoods from current corporate owners-operators who have no vested interest in them or the safety and well-being of its neighbors, and that will protect Pacifica's public health, safety, and welfare. I urge you to please consider amending Pacifica's STR ordinance further, joining with our sister city, Half Moon Bay, and other coastal cities that have become leaders in shielding their communities and residents. Thank you so much.
The last speaker card I have is Dinah Verby.
Good evening, Dinah Verby. I just wanted to comment that it's a little hard to hear in the back of the room. I don't know if there's a way, all the speakers, it's been hard to hear, so I don't know if there's a way to adjust the volume or just have people speak. Anyway, I'm here to support the previous speakers, Cindy Abbott and Suzanne and the others, in terms of, I think this proposed ordinance is a good start, but clearly the problem is bigger and broader than this ordinance addresses. And I understand this was within the direction that the City Council previously gave, but I assume that the purpose of tonight's hearing is to air it again so that you can get further input and further recommendations. And I assume it's also quite within your ability and jurisdiction to send some recommendations on to the City Council. One thing I noticed in the proposed ordinance is that there doesn't seem to be any specific penalty or enforcement mechanism for all of the illegal units, including, for example, ADUs that are being operated as short-term rentals. There doesn't seem to be anything in the ordinance that addresses that, and it appears that those particular units are, being allowed to skate a little bit, because the ordinance speaks only to those who are permitted or who can be permitted. So I'm just offering that up as a consideration. And I also just wonder, this may be totally off the wall, but I wonder if there's a way to address some of the issues through the zoning codes, because it sure seems that some of these enterprises are in fact de facto commercial enterprises that are non-conforming uses within a residential district. And I don't know how you would go about doing that, maybe for future long-term consideration, but it just does seem to me that these are really commercial enterprises that should not be operating within the neighborhoods. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any callers?
Chair Hauser, there are no dial-in comments at this time.
Okay, we'll do the same thing and give a minute. And if anyone else here in the room would like to speak, please fill out a speaker card at the back. Mr. Lynn, anybody?
Chair Hauser, looks like we do have one caller number ending in 9309. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Press 6 to unmute, and speaker, please go ahead. Please state your full name at the start of your comment. Mr. Lin, do you want to announce the last 4 digits of that caller one more time?
Yes, caller ending in 9309. You may go ahead and unmute your microphone with *6. It looks like you're still muted, caller 9309.
Mr. Lin, is their hand raised to indicate they want to speak on this item?
Caller 9309, I see that you are raising your hand. However, and I do see that there is mic activity. However, looks like your mic is unmuted, but the council cannot hear you at this time.
Control their volume is this, but they would have to unmute themselves first.
Yeah, and it does look like they were unmuting themselves periodically, but it's like I think might be a technical issue from their end.
So Chair Hauser, to this dial-in caller, if they can hear me, they are welcome to submit written public comments even after the hearing so that they can be part of the record and they will be transmitted to the City Council. So at least they can provide their input to the process.
Mr. Murdoch, would you want to provide an email that caller could provide comments to during the hearing? And then at the end, before we make any sort of motion, I'll ask if you would like to read that into the record if it's come through.
So the public comment email is publiccomment@pacifica.gov. Again, publiccomment@pacifica.gov.
Okay. So to that caller, if you want to email Mr. Murdoch at that email address, we will try to take your comment via reading it into the record. But for now, unless there are other callers, I'm going to close the public comment period. Is that it? Okay, I will close the public comment period. All right. Commissioners, does anyone want to start? Commissioner Wright.
Just to start with what just happened and the fact that Comcast isn't working, I do have...
Will you speak into the mic?
Sorry. I do have a little bit of a concern that with Comcast not working and the technical difficulties that this person just reached, that perhaps they're not the only one that's had trouble with what's going on. And I do have some concern. There's apparently a lot of public interest in this issue. I want to make sure that we feel like we have done everything we can do to give these people a chance to have a voice.
I concur with you. I think reopening the public hearing to take that person's comment into the record is probably as good as we may get tonight. Mr. Murdoch.
Chair, I'll offer a couple thoughts. First, there's only been one dial-in participant who's indicated interest, so hopefully this issue is impacting only a single individual, which is still important. We've provided that alternative written method if they can get it in before the conclusion of the hearing tonight. The other observation that I'll share is that the dial-in option is an alternative means of participation. It's not the primary, and so there's no legal requirement for that particular system to function in order for the commission to meet all of its requirements for holding the public hearing, and could, if it so desires, proceed tonight.
I understand that it's legal, but at the same time, if people are used to looking on Comcast, seeing it, they understand the instructions, they get to read it on the screen, that's very different. So we may have missed a number of other callers that we're just not aware of and have no way to know. So I just wanted to put voice out there that this is an issue that people have a lot of passion and concern about, and I want to do everything we can do, even for this one caller.
Mr. Lynn, is this the caller now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's reopen the public comment period. Ms. City Attorney, if you can tell me if I need to do anything besides announcing that. All right, let's do it. All right, welcome, speaker. Please state your full name at the start of your comment. Thanks for being patient.
Caller 9309, are you able to hear the council?
Yes. Okay. No. Okay.
Caller, please go ahead with your public comments. We can hear you. Just please speak loudly and clearly into your phone.
Okay, I'm going to move on if everyone's on board. All right, let's close the public comment period. Commissioner Wright, was that it for you?
I have a number of other things I'll come back to later. I just wanted to address that right from the start. Thank you.
I understand. Commissioner Leal? No?
It's me.
Oh, Commissioner Ferguson.
As a fellow resident of West Sharp Park, I definitely echo the sentiments by everyone in the audience. I've had experienced in the last couple of years a noticeable change to the character of our neighborhood, specifically families moving out, being replaced by short-term rentals or corporate owners of short-term rentals, many within a stone's throw of my own house. I applaud the efforts of putting a cap. I don't see what it could hurt in terms of protecting the character of the neighborhoods. I had a couple of questions, mechanically speaking, about how we might go a few steps further than this to get at more of the root cause of concern. And I think most of my questions are for staff, but also for the rest of the commission to consider joining me on. It seems here that we've only sort of addressed a citywide cap, and I don't feel like this is a equal problem for the entirety of Pacifica as a city. I'm wondering if there was more thought put into doing a neighborhood by neighborhood or like a specific zoning ordinance or certain zoning sections. If you look at section 9, 4.903, it states that all residential zones have permitting equally, I guess, under this. So is there any thought to limiting it to certain zones that have already been identified for increasing visitor activity and not to residential neighborhoods that are not designed or zoned for that? On another note, I'd like to talk about the different types of short-term rental permittees. For example, I have a couple of neighbors that work for the federal government and are gone significant portions of the year, 2-3 months at a time, and they come back. I don't personally think it affects the character of our neighborhood for those people to be allowed to earn some money to offset their cost of living in two places. That's a very different type of a permittee than a 365-day-a-year corporation that is, like people were saying, operating a hotel in our neighborhood, which was not zoned or permitted for hotels. It seems you could take a separate approach layered on top of this cap to allow that type of user who is simply augmenting their income to make ends meet here in the neighborhood, current existing residents, rather than allowing a profit-making scheme for people to buy into our neighborhood and displace the families that are already here. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Ferguson. Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I guess this question is more for the city attorney than anyone else. Is there some summary of police activity? There was at least discussion by some of the commenters about a level of annoyance and activities going on at these short-term rentals versus residence houses or something we could refer to as part of this discussion.
Director Murdoch will address that.
So, Commissioner Godwin, the question of quality of life impacts that generate calls for service for the police department, it is a known issue to us, and it is a factor that we researched in prior updates to the City Council. Our research and the data provided by the police department, corroborated by our code enforcement officer as well, who fields similar types of complaints about short-term rentals. The consensus and the conclusions supported by those data were that these short-term rental uses do not trigger a particularly high number of calls for service to the police department or complaints to the code enforcement officer. With that said, at least one commenter has indicated that the community, in her perception, doesn't want to bother the police department with these types of complaints, recognizing the short staffing and perhaps recognizing more urgent calls for service that could come in. So whether the community is self-limiting in terms of reporting these or not, it's not something that I have data to inform a judgment of. I will say anecdotally, members of the community are suggesting they're not reporting all of the potential calls for service that could be reported to the police department related to short-term rentals.
My other question is, I know within the last month, a portion of the street I live on was shut down. The rumor that was going around, I think, was some justification. There was drug manufacturing going on in one of the homes. Is there any provision in these short-term rentals, if there are significant violations of the law, of removing these permits fairly immediately following the discovery and at least a significant allegation of illegal activity or something that's unacceptable?
Yes, there is. And so the ordinance itself contains a revocation process. As much as there may be an emotional and logical reaction to disruptive short-term rentals, we do have to keep in mind as the government, we have to provide due process to all parties, including the permitted party. This is a process to revoke a short-term rental that the city has undertaken in the past in very limited instances. I'm only aware of one for sure. Perhaps there's a small handful. The short-term rental administrator, assistant city manager, Euler Carter, may have additional information on the number of revocations, but they're very rare. But they do require sufficient evidence to substantiate the revocation proceeding. And then when such evidence exists, the city will initiate that revocation process. We have no interest as a city administration in allowing unruly short-term rentals to operate in violation of the adopted regulations. Now, whether the adopted regulations sufficiently cover all of the conduct of concern, if you will, that's a fair question, and really a question for a more robust short-term rental ordinance development process that the City Council could choose to undertake in the next fiscal year.
Well, that's good that it's in there. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Godwin. Commissioner Wright, did you want to?
Yeah, I have a few more questions to add. Staff, in terms of from staff, how much do they think that this will affect the availability of housing for the general public? If you can have more than one rental per building, and we have 150 permits, we're talking about losing a minimum of 150 full-time residences for people in our community. Have you done any kind of analysis about what your expectation is?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, so that information hasn't been collected. That's not as I am aware, that's not a piece of information that needs to be disclosed in the application process of how many units are going to be covered under the permit. And so I don't think we have the data available at this time to do that analysis. If council chooses to direct staff to do a comprehensive update, that could be something that we could research and get more information on.
And Commissioner Wright, I'll just add on that we have provided estimates of the number of dwelling units, which is a conservative estimate, that are impacted. It's less than 1% of dwelling units overall. It's, I think, over nearly 2% or over 2% in the coastal zone. Disproportionate level of dwelling units affected in the coastal zone as compared to non-coastal zone areas. Overall, a relatively small share of the city's dwelling units are affected, but in our current housing crisis, any dwelling unit that's affected and taken off of the long-term residential market, in my opinion anyways, is impactful. Now, as with so many land uses, the city council has to strike the right balance and figure out, where that balance in that line should be drawn. One consideration, of course, is our requirement to comply with the Coastal Act and Coastal Commission certification of an ordinance. Another factor is short-term rentals generate tax revenue that supports other city programs that the community desires. So it's not a simple ban them all and there are no trade-offs. There's a give and take, and that's where the council will have to make that policy decision. Last point on impacts to housing stock that I want to make is in a prior update to council, we explained the data we had showed different impacts to different types of housing units. And what I mean by that is there are relatively few studio and one-bedroom housing units in Pacifica in the overall housing stock, and those are disproportionately operated as short-term rentals based on the data that we have. On the flip side, most or a very, very large share of the housing stock in Pacifica is 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, single-family housing stock. Relatively few of those housing units are operated relative to the overall housing stock. And so it's not easy to just speak in terms of housing impacts without understanding the types of housing that are impacted, some disproportionately compared to others, and logically thinking studios and one bedrooms may be the more affordable long-term housing types available to people of low or moderate income. So there's more to the story that could be analyzed and developed as part of a more robust ordinance development process to say, okay, do we need to focus limitations on the size of the housing unit or different parts of the city? To Commissioner Ferguson's question, there's much more that can be done in terms of zoning, neighborhoods, et cetera, that requires a lot more time and analysis than we have to dedicate to the issue right now.
Okay. Another question I have, or another concern, I guess, would be, let's suppose that it's the prom time of year and there's all these kids up in the city who want to have a party. If you allow one-night stays, you're essentially inviting people to come bother all their neighbors. Has there been any consideration or analysis done on making a minimum number of stays?
That is one of the policy options. I'll defer to Senior Planner O'Connor if she's come across any information related to that issue. But that, along with any other potential regulatory option, needs to be part of a more robust ordinance development process. This cap is really the extent of regulation that we can offer to the Planning Commission and to the City Council right now without sacrificing other priority work and taking that off of the work plan. And the City Council has directed focus on the cap for now. We'll decide if more staff resources should be committed to a more robust ordinance process next fiscal year.
Okay.
And to maybe close out Christian's suggestion, I haven't heard of any consideration of a minimum night stay for consideration so far.
Commissioner Wright, would you mind if I asked a process question really quickly? Sure. Is it possible to make a recommendation tonight that is of the base recommendation that staff has kind of put forth, and to use, Mr. Murdoch, your words, a more robust ordinance development process so that we don't lose all of the time and effort and commentary that people have given us to provide a framework of what that should at bare minimum include?
I think that could be very helpful to the City Council and to the staff if the council prioritizes that ordinance development process to list off, including but not limited to, in terms of potential factors that the city should consider in any future ordinance. That would be helpful.
So if it is okay with the rest of the commissioners, I've been taking a list of kind of what people are recommending and what folks have been recommending from the community, and maybe we'll continue to go through and then we can go through the list. Does that?
I love that process.
Okay, fabulous.
Is it okay if I continue?
Please,
with more
please.
items? Okay. Has there been any consideration by staff about if we limit the number of permits? Let's suppose that there's a family that's a renter here in town, and they need a little bit of extra money to make ends meet. Now we've limited the permits to 150. They can't rent it out a couple of weekends in the summer to get that extra money to get them through the year. How do we balance that and, like, say, senior citizens that need to supplement their income and rent out one of their bedrooms in their house that their kids have moved out in? Has there been any thought given to that?
Yes, so the cap of 150 was identified by City Council in part because it allowed for all current STR permittees to renew their permit within that cap without being affected by the cap. So as the report details, as of December of 2022, there was 129 STR permits issued. A cap of 150 would allow all those current permittees who rely on that income, in the instance that you just detailed, to continue their STR as they need to.
Thank you. And then another quick question for the city attorney. Is there any reason that we couldn't limit the number of days per year that any of these things could operate, as opposed to limiting the number of these things that are out there and available? In other words, instead of having 150 potential problem places, could we cap it to, say, 30 or 60 days per year for any given unit to essentially stop things from becoming a business in an unlicensed hotel?
That is certainly something that we could look at. Some of the issues that we would need to consider in that are the existing permits that have been granted, as well as any concerns that the Coastal Commission may have. But if that's the desire of the Planning Commission to look at some of those options, that could certainly be included.
It seems like a more equitable solution, especially for a seasonal community, and may actually also have a positive effect on our budget, because it may actually end up generating more revenue for us. So I think it's something that's worth considering myself. Another question for staff, mainly, I guess, Christian. Are these places, if we're issuing permits to something that's effectively a hotel, are they going to be held to the same building standards and building codes as hotels are from a life safety perspective? Things like sprinkler systems, things like alarm systems, interconnected alarm systems. Where do we fall out on that?
Sure. So I would say currently, or historically, the STR permit process did not provide enough information for us to flag those potential issues. All of those issues that you've identified are lumped into the category of a change in occupancy classification. So even though it's zoned as a residential use and was constructed as a residential use, the actual use changing to short-term occupancies has the potential to convert the occupancy classification under the building code and trigger upgrades of the type that you described, potential additional exiting, fire sprinklers, and so on.
Fire extinguishers.
Absolutely. So the potential exists. We did not have information to date to address that, but that's an issue, with the more robust regulatory program that we are coming to account with, and we'll flag and follow through on where we learn of those issues. So if someone's aware of a particular property that has converted, by all means, contact the planning department. We will take a look at it, because our ultimate interest is most immediately ensuring the life, health, and safety of the occupants of the building. The neighborhood issues are a separate, more zoning-related issue that's part of this more robust process we've been talking about. But the tools exist to address changes in occupancy classification already when the city learns about them.
Okay. Additionally, did we actively solicit any input from the existing hotels that we have here in town to see how they feel about this?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Let's see. Has there been any consideration given to limiting the number of cars per one of these rental units or the occupancy levels of any of these things? Has that been given any consideration?
I think that would be folded into the future, comprehensive revising of the ordinance, should that be prioritized.
Okay. And could you explain to me the benefit and negatives to, at the end of the term of somebody's permit, why there seems to be two possibilities. One, they can renew. The other is they go to the back of the line. Can you explain to me the reason that you think that not going to the back of the line and just renewing is the better option?
So if someone has a current STR permit and they wish to operate their STR in the future, then they should choose to renew their STR in a timely fashion. If they see that, or if they foresee that they don't plan to use their property as an STR in the future, then they would save themselves the permit fees of the business license and the STR permit and not obtain one.
Yeah, I don't think I made my question clear. That's my bad. I guess I was thinking a little bit about the 151st person and when somebody comes up for renewal, why is the 151st person's right to run one of these things any less than the person that already enjoyed the benefit of having a permit for a year?
I think the intention of the council when they provided us this direction was to maintain the status quo, and so just making sure that the current permittees had the option to continue operating should they choose, and thereby they're getting the priority.
Okay, I guess that's enough of me asking questions for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Leal.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions at this time for staff. The first one is around, I didn't see in the staff report, and I apologize if it's there, but the estimated, or if we know a firm number of unpermitted short-term rentals operating in Pacifica at this time across the entire city. I saw the number of 34 estimated in the coastal zone, but I didn't see the total amount.
Yes, that data point is not in the report. We did receive data from HDL that probably could identify that number. I don't know if I could pull it up on the spot. So I don't have that number handy, but we do have the data that would probably identify that.
Yeah, then yesterday, Monday, I did a random just Airbnb search of Pacifica random weekend in April, and so 166 available STRs showed up, which doesn't include those that are already booked or those booked through other platforms like Booking.com or VRBO. So I guess I'll just start with the 166 number and go up from there for the number that's at least in my head, unless we have a firmer number from our vendor. My second question is, so going with that number, if we cap it at 150, we would have a wait list. I think that's actually a good and healthy thing to maintain. The second question I have is around kind of going to the public comment around enforcement. Is city staff aware of any STRs that have operated within the city since the initial ordinance passing where the city has contacted the operator of a non-permitted STR and they've basically rectified the issue?
I think I can help answer that one. So the city has hired a consultant, HDL, to help with the processing of these STR permits. Part of their scope is to also identify unpermitted STRs and reach out to them and to bring them into compliance. And maybe as a helpful point of reference to your earlier question, in a presentation that was provided to the City Council in October, we presented that as of September 2022, there was 101 registered STRs. There was 49 closed or cease STRs activity locations, and 24 unregistered or unresponsive STRs. So there was, nearly 170 STRs overall permitted or unpermitted that had occurred at one time in the city.
Okay, thank you for those data points.
And Commissioner Leal, the number operating, permitted and unpermitted, it's fluid. It goes up and down. You can't, pin a particular number. What I can say is HDL has had some fair amount of success in getting unpermitted operators to register, but not all of them have. And so among all the different violations in the city, we have to prioritize our enforcement resources to address those. And so that's a longer-term process for the STR administrator, the planning department's code enforcement team, the city attorney's office. We're all there to help support that effort. And it is, an ongoing, somewhat cat and mouse game as operators pop up, operate, maybe go offline. So it's a little bit difficult to be very specific about that information.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, if we chose to do nothing tonight and just recommend to the city council they build a more robust ordinance during the 2023 planning and allocate resources for it, what do you think the downside would be of just not doing anything in 2023 and waiting for the new ordinance to be studied and planned out?
I think from my perspective, the risk is the proliferation of STRs would continue and could exceed the cap if it had been in place. And thus, whatever protections, however limited they're perceived by those that perhaps don't support the cap, they do at least provide a ceiling to the number of properties that could be used for the STR use and provides some measure of protection and limits the scope of the impact for the community until such a time as the city council prioritizes a more robust ordinance to be developed.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to kind of go through a couple of thoughts that I have. First, I wanted to speak to something that one of the community members had said. I believe there is something in the ordinance that prohibits STRs in both ADUs and newly and junior accessory dwelling units. So I appreciated that add by staff. I think that if we are going to approve something tonight, it does truly have to be a stopgap measure where something is considered more robustly. I think we're all on the same page that this is not enough. I think we need to do things like considering to lower the cap over time. So for example, if there are 125 permittees, maybe the goal is 100, and as people have violations and roll out, we don't offer new permits. So I think that we need to consider what that cap is. I would say that 150 is too much. And I think for very obvious reasons that this needs to be a cap on units and not a cap on permits. The idea that a sixplex could be all Airbnbs or that VRBO can own an apartment building is absurd when we're trying to get 2,000 new housing units in our housing element. So I think those are really easy things to put forward. I also appreciated a lot of the well-written comments that we received, and I think there was a common thread through a lot of them. They seem to be coordinated. So in addition, I'd like to also recommend that we put forth to council the primary residence requirement, which means that no out-of-town person can live in Montana and own a Pacifica home as an STR. I think limiting the maximum number of rental nights to 60 nights of unhosted nights makes sense. So this is essentially the Half Moon Bay ordinance that was quoted by a lot of folks. Maximum number of STRs per owner-operator, I think that kind of goes away if you have a primary residence requirement. So I'm not married to that one because I think it's kind of asked and answered. I think that we do want to implement compliance standards and take folks not just who have major violations, but who have any violation that they don't rectify or cure within 30 days of anything that's part of the STR standard. I think that should be grounds for losing your permit. And then I think performance standards that help ensure the safety of the surrounding neighborhood are really important. I have heard horror stories of unjust evictions for people converting their homes to Airbnbs. And it's very frustrating to not know who to contact in the circumstances that this happens. You don't know who owns the house. You can't just go over and talk to your neighbor. I had like the Airbnb of luxury car rentals in my neighborhood, and in front of my home was like a Maserati and like 3 other luxury cars for weeks on end. There was no trash, there was no noise, it was just cars, but there's something very overwhelming about having strangers coming into your neighborhood and not really understanding what is happening. So I think that when we make this recommendation to council, if the commission agrees that we do this with the framework in mind, that these are things that we have to enumerate to council, because there is a lot of really comprehensive thought that's gone into what should be here, and there's more that's needed. So those are my thoughts. Anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Wright, you have your light on.
Sorry, I have a couple more quick questions. As to the ADU piece, I mean, my understanding is that the purpose of the ADU is to go ahead and add more units for people to live in. If we were to also ask for a proof of full-time residency in the ADU unit for anybody who's trying to short-term rental the larger unit, to stop somebody from utilizing the ADU as a crash pad when they're renting out their bigger place, therefore, getting around the whole point of the ADU might be something worth considering. I'm also wondering if staff considered what the impacts would be to the willingness of larger developers to come in and build any future hotels here on a couple of sites I can think of off the top of my head, like the big lot over here, or perhaps over at the quarry. Have you done any analysis or consideration of that?
No, we have not, as part of preparing the cap for consideration tonight. I think it is important to consider that these are somewhat different product types and different experiences for people, so I'd caution against concluding that they're necessarily direct competitors with one another, but I think it's a valid point that probably warrants some analysis.
And then did you do any consideration to what kind of value impact it's going to have on the property for a permit holder? It would seem to me that your property would be worth a little more if you can generate all this income out of it, and it would actually detract from the value for the people that live next door. And I have a little bit of a concern about that. Have you given any kind of a consideration to that and how we might address some equity issues in that regard?
Sure. So the simple answer again is no. All of these factors would require significant time from staff to research and to analyze, and for that reason, we focused on preparing the cap, consistent with the City Council's direction to do so, until more resources are committed by the Council through the goal-setting process. With that said, when preparing the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit ordinance update, the first comprehensive update I think we did in the 2015 timeframe, I did analyze and simply compare what typical rents were for a rental dwelling unit on a long-term basis and what the types of rents could be from a short-term rental operated 30 days per month, and is significantly more revenue potential for the short-term rental operation, which, the economic pressure is to rent a short-term rental rather than a long-term housing unit. And so there are potential housing availability impacts. I presume then that there could be potential property value impacts favorably for the short-term rental operator. I don't have any data that indicates that property values of non-STR properties surrounding an STR necessarily diminish.
And forgive me, but I'm not clear. Have we considered, or what is the fine structure around people that are either not getting their permit or abusing their privilege of permit and causing trouble for their neighbors.
So to your question and to some of the public questions about enforcement, currently the STR ordinance is a relatively basic regulatory construct that has basic operational requirements, and most importantly, when this ordinance was first developed, it was a mechanism to clarify the lawfulness of STRs operating in compliance with the operational standards, and it provided a mechanism to ensure they were registered for transient occupancy tax, or TOT. So it helped support the city's desire at that time to collect transient occupancy tax. So no more robust, STR-specific enforcement process was included in this ordinance. So currently, a violation of the STR standards is the same as any other violation of the city's zoning code and municipal code. There are administrative citations that can be assessed, 100, 200, 500 for a first, second, and third violation, respectively. Additionally, the city does have the option to perhaps charge it as a misdemeanor and prosecute it as a criminal violation, or pursue administrative misdemeanor citations of up to $1,000 per violation. So there are a variety of options from a traditional enforcement standpoint, and there are potentially other civil remedies that Assistant City Attorney Murphy can explain if desired, where the city could sue or seek a restraining order or other types of civil remedies through the courts to stop someone from operating in violation. So we have the full range of enforcement tools for STR violations, just as we do with any other zoning or Pacifica Municipal Code violation.
Thank you. I think it's pretty clear to me. I mean, I know I have my own concerns about this. I understand with the amount of work that staff put into this, staff has their own concerns about this. The amount of input that we got from the community by email, by letter, there's a lot of community concern. There's a lot of community concern sitting right over there. Is there any amendments or other suggestions that staff thinks would be a good idea to posit to council to consider if we move something forward tonight?
To be perfectly frank, I don't know that there's much that I could suggest other than the cap that's been presented. Essentially, any other regulatory option would require analysis and staff time that we do not have the ability to commit to analyze that. What seems simple on its face is in fact quite complex when it comes to STR regulation. Figuring out where you are relative to other communities, figuring out are there vested property rights that could, complicate the city's ability to take away the enjoyment of a permit that someone already has if they purchase property to exercise that permit. There's a lot of complexity to STR regulation that's not evident on its face. What seems commonsensical can trigger a number of other unintended consequences that require a significant amount of staff and city attorney's office time to analyze, to vet, and to make a recommendation. And to do anything of the sort beyond the cap that we've prepared, I think would be inconsistent with the city council's direction at this time. And so I would strongly suggest as my recommendation to include those as factors to be considered if and when the council prioritizes a more robust ordinance development process.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Ferguson and then Commissioner Leal.
A quick dovetail off what Christian was just saying. I like the existing cap at 154 now with a handful of bullet points we've talked about as a recommendation for further analysis. But I think that if we just left it at 150, your current permittees are 129, and the problem exists right now. So if you kept it at 150 and left all those permittees as is, you do nothing to address the existing problem that's already here. So I think long-term, although it might be sticky and difficult, we have to find a way to walk back from where we've let things get to a level that's allowable to the community and is in fitting with all of the work we do to protect our neighborhoods as is. So I would be in favor of a motion that starts at 150 because it's something we can get to tonight. It's where the direction we've been given, but provides a recommendation to find a scale down back to a number that's less than 129 at the very least, because where it is now, I think unanimously in the room, we can say that where it is now isn't where we need it to be. Specifically focused on the number of units like we talked about. I'd love to see if it's possible, just as a recommendation, to conduct some kind of analysis as far as the impacts to existing permitted commercial hotels as it pertains to city revenue streams. Because it's my experience, and we have visiting family that have used short-term rentals in Pacifica, mostly because of walkability to where we live and availability of hotels during key weekends like Thanksgiving, Christmas, et cetera. If there's only one hotel in our neighborhood, it's often not available. Therefore, this might be the only option. But I see, as with most weekends, if a short-term rental was not available, it's an obvious jump to a hotel if you're just coming to visit family, which I think is a lot of the visitor usage in Pacifica. So I'd love to see some analysis done as to, is there actually an effect to city revenue streams if you start scaling back from where we are right now on short-term rentals, or if that would just be picked up from another revenue stream in commercial hotels, which we already have. We have a push to put more effort into those. And I would like to say that from my standpoint, if I was going to ask for a recommendation of something to look at, I think 60 days might actually be too much, being that the majority of the rental income, and I have two direct neighbors who have gone the route of going short-term rentals, comes from a handful of key weekends and weeks throughout the year. So if the idea is to incentivize long-term rentals or else selling to permanent residents, and I think a long-term rental is still going towards the solution we're talking about, right? It's still a family living in that house versus having it be used like a hotel. So if people choose to move away and not sell their property but want to go to a long-term rental, I think that achieves all of our goals. I think a goal of 30 days annually is actually a better incentive to push new and existing permittees in the long term towards keeping the character of our neighborhoods and not operating as businesses in residential neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just my thoughts on this topic. So first off, I'm also a resident of West Sharp Park, one of the more impacted neighborhoods in Pacifica. We recently had a property sell within the past year, and it was turned in across the street from my house, and it was turned into a short-term rental immediately. So I'm aware of the challenges members in our community are facing here. I'm also a short-term rental operator of a property outside of San Mateo County. So I actually I could have both perspectives here in understanding this issue as it impacts our community. So I wanted to share just some observations that I've experienced outside of Pacifica and wider San Mateo County in some things that we may be able to bring to Pacifica to better regulate these short-term rentals. First off is around guest safety. I think it's been brought up a couple times around carbon monoxide monitors, smoke detectors. At least where I operate a short-term rental, there's actually on-site fire department inspections that are required. I think that's something we should consider in Pacifica. We do have folks coming in from out of town or sometimes in town, but we require these of other businesses. Given that these short-term rentals have business license, we may want to evaluate that for these properties, especially since folks will be staying the night in these properties. There's a lot of mention around a good neighbor flyer. This is something that has been implemented at other communities. I think in our community, information around ocean safety is probably key to include on that, but there's a lot of good examples of what else could go onto a good neighbor flyer. But given that most short-term rentals are probably going to be along the coast, in the coastal zone in Pacifica, things around ocean safety is probably something to be considered. In terms of permits, number of permits, I think it's fairly standard that if you have a permit, as long as you renew, you have first right in approvals. I think that's pretty standard operating. And if you miss the deadlines, then you go back to the end of the line. I think that incentivizes folks to get permits as soon as possible instead of sit around until the stick comes. You go after the carrot. Regarding nights rented, I was a little unclear in some of the comments, but here's my comment on nights rented. I think if you have a permit, we should actually have a minimum nights rented annually instead of a maximum. Getting a permit should be a privilege, and this is a route that other counties have, or municipalities have undergone, where if you get the permit, the city's expectation is that you're going to use it, and it also brings in TOT taxes. We're going to limit the number of permits. We're going to have more regulations. So if you get it, you need to use it. So I actually would be interested in seeing information around minimum nights rented as opposed to maximum. I guess my last comment before I give my thoughts on what's in front of us tonight is around just general short-term rentals in our community. What I've seen in other communities is that folks have second homes. They live out of state, they live out of the area, they have second homes in Pacifica. When they, outside of the recent short-term rental proliferation in the past 10 to 15 years, these homes were vacant except for a couple weeks a year when folks came to town to visit their second home. With short-term rentals, that now opens the opportunity for those homes to be occupied, tax dollars to be spent in the city of Pacifica, and those homes to be used. And just because we may limit the amount of short-term rentals in our community, that may not actually improve the overall available housing stock. So I think just to throw that out there in terms of considerations, because that's also another dynamic that's at play here is second homes. And there's examples of this just on Beach Boulevard too, that are homes that are vacant most of the year, or I've never actually seen anyone in the house itself. Lastly, so in terms of what's in front of us tonight, I think it's clear we either postpone, we make a decision tonight. I think the risk of postponing is that this may not be taken up in the future, depending on priorities of council's goals, as already mentioned. So I'm okay with moving forward with staff's recommendation. It's a stopgap. It's a change to the current ordinance, and we get to revisit this in less than 2 months, or roughly 2 months at City Council goal setting. So I guess those are my thoughts, those are my in what's in front of us tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Leal. Mr. Murdoch, at this point, has that one phone caller submitted comments via writing?
Mr. Lin, do you happen to recall the last 4 digits of that commenter?
Yes, the last 4 digits is 9309.
So that individual did submit comments?
Okay. Ms. City Attorney, do we need to open the public hearing to hear those comments and have them officially read into the record? This is uncharted for me.
Yes, you can reopen the public hearing to take this comment.
So I will reopen the public hearing for this one commenter.
Thank you, Chair. And before I begin, I just want to say this is extraordinary and not something we typically do, to read the comments, and it's not something we did during the COVID emergency as well. So with that out of the way, this individual identified himself as 9309, stated name is Clifford Lawrence, West Fairmont. Unable to connect. Every time I would unmute, it would lower my hand. NOM, channel 26, no phone number, etc. listed on agenda. This proposal will not begin to address the loss of residential housing to commercial parties, converting these to STRs. Counting only the number of permits when a permit has no maximum number of units makes no sense. Having no enforcement makes no sense. It's pointless. A law-abiding city owner finds themselves next to a commercial enterprise without any zone change. Once the genie is out of the bottle, you will not be able to put it back in. I'm sorry I cannot write more in this short time. I wish I could have been there, but COVID is still keeping me away, and probably many others too. This is very sad. Please invoke a moratorium now. The time is running out. Tonight's experience trying to participate, very trying.
Okay, well, I appreciate Mr. Lawrence's submitting a comment in writing. And with that, I will reclose the public comment period. So I think what I'd like to do at this point is figure out if we have a consensus on the framework that I kind of laid out at the beginning. So does everyone feel comfortable kind of making a recommendation similar to what staff has recommended, but with the inclusion of a framework for City Council to consider either at goal setting or at their own, whenever this comes up to them? Does everyone feel comfortable with that approach?
Are you going to itemize?
I am, and I will try to itemize each one. If I missed anything, please raise your hand. And I think we'll go through each one to try to get consensus. And if there's not consensus, at least a majority. Okay. I'd also like to make the recommendation that we save anything pertaining to TOT and finances, that we just leave all of that to City Council as their purview. Is everyone okay with that approach as well? Okay. So what I heard was that we should, and this was you, Commissioner Ferguson, consider a neighborhood by neighborhood cap rather than a cap of the city overall sometime in the future. Is everyone on board with that? I'm seeing a lot of head nods. I'm seeing a majority of head nods. Okay. Commissioner Wright, you mentioned no single night stays to avoid parties and other loud noise-making events. Does anyone have any issue with that? Okay, I'm going to keep going. If we allow multi-unit buildings, they need to be built with the same code requirements as the occupancy appropriate to the use. However, I'm going to posit that we would benefit by not allowing multi-unit buildings to be covered by this.
I'd also be in favor of that.
Okay.
I would posit that the most important, but since we're just giving recommendations, the most important thing would be to clarify that it's units and not permits, and permits shouldn't be an unlimited number of units.
I think that is the one thing that I would like to change when making the motion,
Right.
is that instead of permits, it's units, and that when it does go to council, that's the commission's direction. Is that amenable to staff?
I think it's a deceivingly complicated point and distinction to make that
Okay.
could present potential complications for a multi-unit operator who has a single permit and may not be able to get permits for all of the units that are currently operating. And that's an issue that requires, I think, a fair amount of research and consideration before becoming law.
I think what we're saying is that a permit represents a unit, and maybe the council in their deliberation could issue 5 permits. I mean, that's not what we're recommending, but I think since we're just making suggestions of their deliberations, I think as long as we're equating a permit to a unit, and then council subsequently is considering the amount. Do you follow the distinction?
I don't exactly. I don't know if other staff does. I think the council's direction was to implement a cap of 150 STRs, and the potential exists, as we've noted, that many of the permit holders currently may operate multiple units. And so to allow them to continue to operate, which I understand to be the council's guidance, maintain the status quo but impose a cap, that could throw into question what the appropriate number is, and we don't have data at this point in time to determine what that number would be in terms of STR permits above 150 to allow all of the current permittees to continue operating.
Commissioner
Why-
Godwin.
Yeah, there was a discussion that a lot of the units that are, or permits that are currently operating cover 1 and 2 bedroom units. So I assume there could be multiple units covered under one permit. And so it sounds like if we start to do what you're suggesting, 1 permit per unit, that could get real messy real quick and be really different than what the operator thinks he had a permit for last month.
There also are existing short-term rentals that rent individual bedrooms within a single unit as separate
Right.
rental units. But is there a way to lay out a guideline for something that would take effect on October 31st of 2023 so that existing permit holders aren't affected until the renewal period?
Again, there's any number of different ways to craft the regulations, all of which are complicated and require time to analyze and to make a recommendation, time that we don't have as staff to do, certainly not tonight and not for the remainder of this fiscal year. That's why anything other than a 150 cap or some different numerical number related to a simple cap is not something that the staff can fully develop into an ordinance or a recommendation for the foreseeable future until prioritized by the City Council.
Commissioner Wright?
So the definition of STR that we are using tonight is a lot, not a unit.
No, it's a permit.
It's a permit.
It's a permit.
Which could include, one unit on a lot, or it could include multiple units on a lot, or it can include a portion of a structure on a lot.
I mean, go ahead, Commissioner Godwin, and then I'll.
Oh, I like Commissioner Leal's idea of a minimum nights rented too. Is there any possibility of including that? So if you acquire one of these permits and you rent it out, not at all, or a couple of nights a year, that's really not in the spirit of what we're trying to do. Could we add a sentence saying it must be at least 15 nights a year or something to that without making it more burdensome on the staff or making it harder to implement?
So I think one component of the short-term rental ordinance that has not been discussed that I want to clarify is we've spent a lot of time talking about the effort it would take to analyze and to craft such an ordinance, but every ordinance has an enforcement component and an administrative and a bureaucratic component. The more tailored and sophisticated and particular that the ordinance is, the higher the burden on the staff or the staff managing its consultants that it would take to actually implement and enforce. And without the proper assignment of resources on the administration and enforcement side, you're left with dissatisfied residents expecting one outcome when the city is not able to resource the administration to ensure that outcome. And so that is, again, a resourcing decision that the City Council would need to make in order to determine not only what are the appropriate regulations, but how much staff and financial resources are we willing to commit to administration and oversight of that program. Again, simple on its face, complicated in its application.
Understand, I just was trying to make an argument for one point that I thought was useful.
So, and I'll go through in order of the things that we kind of listed, and we can get to the minimum versus maximum night stay. But going back to the number of units versus number of permits, at the very least, I see it as a major deficiency on our application that we didn't ask this question. And if it's too messy to implement this now and we just want to ask council to consider it, I would, at the very least, think it's really important to add a row on the application to at least get us the data. If we're asking people to submit an application, it's a very easy thing to fill out. So.
And again, I'll just reiterate, that is a simple thing to do. However, the ordinance, the genesis of the ordinance we have currently was to ensure registration primarily for taxation purposes. And so the particular characteristics of the operation weren't necessarily important to the City Council's regulatory approach at that time. So critique, well taken. It is something that we could consider crafting into the administration and the application materials moving forward.
Okay. Commissioner Wright?
Is it staff's opinion that with these fees and these permits and the tax revenue that it's going to generate, will this pay for itself? Will it actually end up in the end being a burden on the city, or will it actually generate revenue?
So I don't have firsthand knowledge right now of the sufficiency of the fees that we charge for these permits. My impression is that they cover the costs of the consultant that we have, but that is for a very limited regulatory scheme. The level of fee to administer that very likely would need to increase with the amount of sophistication, detail, standards, requirements, et cetera, for a more robust STR ordinance. That would place a financial burden on the potential operators, may increase the costs of the per night stay, and so there are a variety of potential knock-on effects. Ultimately, the city's goal generally is to achieve cost recovery with its permitting processes, so I can only imagine that whatever proportionate increase in administrative time or consultant time to do that, there would be a proportionate increase in the cost for the permit to ensure cost neutrality for the city.
And one other final question. Will we and will the community have a chance for additional input later? If this is a stopgap measure, is there going to be another discussion and another decision point once we've gone through this whole process?
Yes, so there are multiple, public input opportunities moving forward after tonight. The next logical opportunity is the City Council public hearing on the Planning Commission's recommendation, whatever that ends up being for this ordinance. Folks can submit public comments at any time to publiccomment@pacifica.gov or to their city council members, or mail or drop it off to the planning department. And then the next logical opportunity would be at the goal setting process, where the city council will be deciding what priority work plan items to put on the work plan for the next fiscal year starting in July. And then at any point thereafter, again, at city council meetings, through the general public comment, et cetera, there are ample opportunities for the public to relay, their desires and concerns related to short-term rental regulations.
Okay. I'm going to keep plugging through this list if everyone's amenable to it. So Commissioner Wright mentioned limiting the number of occupants and vehicles allowed. Is everybody on board with that? Okay. I'm seeing three, so I'm going to keep moving. If there needs to be more deliberation, please. Okay. We talked about safety standards needing to be implemented. I think that makes sense. Okay. We had both considering a minimum number of nights and considering a maximum number of nights, both 60 and 30. So I think that needs a little bit more deliberation. I'm personally in favor of the maximum, and I would be comfortable with Commissioner Ferguson's recommendation of 30 or with what Half Moon Bay did at 60.
And I don't see how that solves either issue, but I think there could be a binary approach, and since we're just making non-binding recommendations to City Council to consider for their own priorities and kind of being held hostage by what is and what is not achievable with our current, resources, you might as well throw on there, what about a binary approach? That we have this many of this type of permit that's a 365-day-a-year user, and this many of this type of permit that's allowable in residential areas. If you want to get that complex with it, or we just recommend that they look into fixing the existing problem through the use of a limit of days and leave it to them to decide.
I like that idea.
Please speak into your microphone.
I like that idea of like a short-term permit and a year-long permit. I think there's a lot of merit to that.
It's just recommendations, right?
Right.
We're going to do nothing about the existing problem. In fact, we're allowing for 21 more permits with this. I apologize to the community for all the people that came out and thought that something was going to happen that was going to be useful to an existing problem in the neighborhood. It seems like that's beyond our scope for tonight.
Okay. I'm pretty fond of considering sunsetting the cap from 150 to a lower number that I think would solve the problem. And the number that comes to mind is 75, but I think it needs to be studied by our consultant.
And if we're providing the recommendation to split it to units instead of permits, what that even looks like from existing to future.
Okay?
Could we perhaps suggest a goal of X and further consideration and review to be considered?
I mean, the goal that I'm suggesting is 75.
I support a goal of
Units.
75 units.
Okay,
75 units.
correct, not permits. Right.
And
Because-
long-term permits is what you're talking about now.
Right, because
Full year
units
round.
will, in our recommendations, units will equate to permits.
Right.
At some point when this is feasible to,
I think the
Implement.
coastal commission gets a vote too. It's 75 or whatever the coastal commission allows or something, just to limit it to.
sure. Okay. The primary residence requirement is a big one. Do we want to recommend that an owner is a primary residence?
I'm for it. You certainly can't have a minimum number of days if you live there.
Any other comment?
Is that even legal?
Yeah.
You can limit other state residents from issuing this?
That certainly is something that we could look into in greater detail.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's potentially issues.
In my understanding, the question to be requiring the property owner to be on site during the rental, is that what?
No,
you're describing?
it's that you're renting your primary residence.
Well, I mean, as was brought up, there's people who have second houses in Pacifica of significant number, and maybe they live elsewhere in the county or elsewhere in the state, and, it seems like
There are other mechanisms other than short-term rental to achieve that income with that situation.
True.
Snowbirds do that all over the place all the time, as do,
Agreed.
people booking ski leases for the year.
Commissioner Leo?
Thank you, Chair. On this particular topic, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do agree that it should be looked at from a council perspective. I think all the ideas that were raised this evening should be passed on to council and should be studied further in our community for further deliberation. So if council and the community so choose that this being a requirement, then so be it. But I think we should pass that on, although that personally I don't necessarily think that should be a requirement, especially with the cap and other restrictions. I did want to add, I omitted from my prior statement, I did want to add another item we should pass to council if everyone agrees is, and it's along these lines, is having a local contact person. So within someone who could be at the property within 60 minutes is usually something that other municipalities implement 24/7. So this person would be on record with the police department or within the city as well, so that they can contact that person. If there's an issue at the property, that person will be there within 60 minutes and they can rectify the issue. So that's also something I'd like to recommend.
Can we get some consensus on that? Okay. Commissioner Wright?
Just a point of clarification as we've been going here. Are renters eligible for permits, leaseholders, or only property owners, or leaseholders with property owner permission?
So the definition of a permittee does include renters, but they would need property owner permission, authorization.
Thank you.
Okay, the only other two on the list that I have are compliance standards. So if you have violations that you don't cure within a specified cure period, you lose your permit. And then I'm going to call them neighborhood unity standards, where you're not, putting a commercial dumpster in front of the house or other things akin to that.
Could we suggest,
One again?
could we suggest a limit of the number of violations in any given permit period?
Do you have a number in mind?
I'm good with that.
2. Okay, well, I think 2 is what Half Moon Bay was doing. Was there something?
Could you repeat
Commissioner
the last
Godwin?
statement?
Oh, like a neighborhood, I'm going to call them neighborhood unity standards, where people who own these are not putting commercial signage out or getting a dumpster or things that interfere with the feel of the neighborhood. Okay. All right. Is there anything else before we keep going? All right, does someone have a motion?
Chair Hauser, I'd like to read back the recommendations that I've captured before proceeding to the motion if possible.
Please.
So those where I heard Planning Commission consensus, and please let me know if I've missed any, was that the future ordinance to be developed, if identified as a priority work plan, should include factors, including but not limited to a neighborhood-based cap requiring more than one night minimum stay, verification of potential changes in occupancy classification under the building code, occupancy limits, minimum off-street parking requirements, 1 permit required per dwelling unit, not per property, on-site guest safety inspections for smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and other safety code requirements, a diminishing cap over time, requirement for a local contact person, requirement that the STR be a primary residence for the operator, but not requiring that the primary occupant be on-site during STR operation, abandonment of an STR permit if violations are not addressed within 30 days of notice by the city, and trash receptacle design and placement standards. I'm not sure I heard consensus on a number of nights limit, or if the recommendation is more general to impose such a limit. Also, previously had noted a maximum number of STRs operated by an individual operator, which I didn't hear discussed most recently.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Murdoch. So does anyone have issue with adding that each operator has a maximum number of STRs that they can operate?
I'm okay with limiting it.
That would be per permittee.
Per permittee.
It's a fine recommendation for me. I don't know what that would look like, really.
Okay. The only things that I take note of, Mr. Murdoch, is for the violations. We're saying that we would recommend 2 violations before the permittee loses their permit. And I think the sunset for the cap that we were recommending was 75 units.
Could I ask for a clarification also? What was the parking clarification? A certain number of vehicles per unit, per bedroom. I heard off-street parking, but that doesn't stop somebody from throwing a big party in the house and having the whole neighborhood impacted with 1 million cars.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a certain number of cars, say per bedroom, that are allowed would accomplish that goal.
Sure. So I think I had envisioned that it would be addressed in a couple different ways based on what was stated. One is the occupancy limits. So the number of people allowed in the building or in the STR at any given time would not be exceeded, which I think would likely function to limit the number of vehicles associated with the STR. And then also requiring a certain number of off-street parking spaces. The standards, I can't speculate what those should be, but I imagine they would be tailored to the size of the STR. So therefore, they would need to demonstrate, for example, that they have several parking spaces if they have several bedrooms that are being rented, so that there's the ability to provide or to park those vehicles off of the street. I don't know of any, good mechanism to attribute one vehicle parked on the street to an STR as compared to some other use in their public streets for public parking, and particularly in the coastal zone, visitors, have an equal right to others to use the parking. So I think there's some enforcement complexity there, but you can make, I think, good headway towards that issue with those other parameters that you would impose.
Mr. Murdoch, the one other thing that I'd like to add, which I think goes without saying, but I think it would be really helpful to have it written in our recommendation, is to clarify that we're recommending a more robust ordinance development process and that this is being viewed as a stopgap measure.
Yes, so there's actually a recital that I've prepared that would be added to the resolution for the recommendation once we pin down the specific criteria.
Okay.
So I did make a revision to a diminishing cap over time to 75 STRs, and then abandonment of an STR permit if 2 violations are substantiated by the city within 1 year. Okay. And then I don't think I heard where we're going, if anywhere, with the recommendation on the limit to the number of nights, and if that's still important or not. There was some support for a maximum, some support for a minimum, differing maximums. Is there explore appropriate minimum and maximum stays, a more generalized recommendation? Currently, I don't have enough to include that.
I know my own personal thoughts on this. Does anyone want to jump in? Commissioner Leal.
I think I think we should recommend council to look at number of nights. I don't know if we need to recommend whether it should be minimum or maximum, but I think that topic should be reviewed or should be passed on as a topic of consideration or deliberation amongst us.
So appropriate minimum and maximum stays per STR or something along those lines?
Maybe both points could be delineated so that council understands what our thinking was, that there was a concern about TOT that encouraged conversations about a minimum, but that there also was conversation about a maximum of 30 to 60 days. And I don't know if we want to delineate a majority or a minority in that, if that's appropriate. But if it is appropriate, we could poll the commission.
I mean, my sense here is that determining what those minimums and maximums should be studied and compared to other cities, and the pros and cons of those various approaches vetted as part of that process. I think it's hard to sit here now, at least from my perspective, and know what that number should be.
Sure.
Similarly, I think, specifying a cap of 75, I don't know what that's grounded in. If that's the commission's recommendation, then so be it. But currently, there's a rationale behind the cap of 150. I think we would need to further develop a specific cap if that's part of the recommendation, but perhaps that can wait.
Okay, then I think we leave the kind of vague language for not for the 75, let's keep the 75, but the language for studying the minimum or maximum amount of nights. Okay.
Does the commission want some criteria like, to balance neighborhood impacts with, TOT and other considerations? Are those two of the key factors that the commission is attempting to balance there? Or just more general, an appropriate minimum and maximum?
I think both things are the council's purview, right? So it's just notifying them that we recognize both priorities and leaving it to them to study and make a decision.
Agree. Commissioner Leal? Agree. Okay. Commissioner Godwin?
Yeah, my concern with the minimum, if you limit the number of these facilities and you have a business that isn't generating any tax revenue because they don't have any customers, do you really want to keep renewing their permit when you don't get a revenue stream from them versus somebody who's in the waiting line who would be much more vigorous in their pursuit of the business and generate a lot more money for the city is the reason I thought the minimum idea was useful.
Right. I think Commissioner Leal made an interesting point. I presume that if the city has an STR permit process, it's because it wants a certain number of STRs to operate within the delineated parameters, not to have people hoarding permits because they are afraid that they won't be able to get an STR permit in the future, and having non-operating or less than efficient STR operations. I'm assuming a lot there, but I think there's some reasonableness
that
to
was
that.
the general idea I had, that you want an efficient operation, you want some tax revenue if you issue a permit. If somebody doesn't meet that criteria, you want them not be able to renew and give somebody else who has a better idea and more robust pursuit of the business a chance.
Right. I think, there's a sound policy basis to that. There are also, other policy bases, but I think for this level of recommendation and detail, appropriate minimum and maximum, such as a 30 to 60-day maximum per year is how I've crafted it for now.
That's perfect. I mean, that's my motivation, but doesn't need to go to that level of detail.
Do you have what you need, Mr.
So the
Murdock?
full language that would be added to the resolution recommending city council action on this would read as follows. Whereas the public testimony related to the proposed ordinance has demonstrated that the presence of short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods has created quality of life issues, including noise, trash, and parking congestion that warrant further study by the city in order to develop more robust short-term rental regulations. And the Planning Commission recommends that the City Council prioritize this item in its goal-setting process for fiscal year 2023-2024. Factors to be considered in a future ordinance should include, but not be limited to, a neighborhood-based cap, more than one night minimum stay, verification of potential changes in occupancy classification under the building code, occupancy limits, minimum off-street parking requirements, one permit required per dwelling unit, not per property, on-site guest safety inspections for smoke and carbon monoxide detectors and other safety code requirements, a diminishing cap over time to 75 STRs, requirement for a local contact person for the STR operator, requirement that an STR be a primary residence for the operator, but not requiring that the primary occupant be on site during STR operation, abandonment of STR permit if 2 violations are substantiated by the city within 1 year, trash receptacle design and placement standards, maximum number of STRs operated by an individual operator, and appropriate minimum and maximum stays per year of STR operation, including possibly a maximum of 30 to 60 days per year.
Thank you for capturing that. So, does anyone want to make a motion? Commissioner Ferguson.
It's your list, but if you'd like me to, I'll have a crack at it.
I don't think you need to read the list. I think you could. Yeah.
Give me just a moment. I would move that the Planning Commission finds the proposed ordinance exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act and adopts the resolution as included in Attachment A to the staff report to initiate text amendment TA 123-22 and recommends approval to the City Council and incorporates all maps and testimony into the record by reference, including the recommendations we have agreed to tonight and has been read back by Mr. Murdock at this meeting.
Is there a second? Commissioner Godwin.
I second the motion.
May we have a vote, please?
And that motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. All right. Yes, okay, we'll take a two-minute break and come back for item 3. Thanks, everyone, for bearing with us.
places like this are not conducive to but, you know, I kind of do.
I sure can. I'm waiting.
I know there was talk, at least during the general plan update, of having a Saturday session.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Give, more open feedback.
All right, we're going to move on to item number 3, file number 2020-029, installation of a temporary structure to enclose Ocean Shore Railroad Car number 1409, and performance of restoration work on the railroad car on a portion of a city-owned parking lot located at 1910 Francisco Boulevard. May we please have a staff report?
Good evening. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Stephanie Cervantes with the Planning Division, and I will be presenting item 3 on tonight's agenda, file number 2022-029. The project site has a 2040 general plan designation of mixed-use center, a local coastal land use designation of commercial, and a zoning designation of neighborhood commercial coastal zone combining district. The project site is on an existing city-owned parking lot at 1910 Francisco Boulevard, bounded by Soledad Avenue on the north and San Jose Avenue on the south. The Pacifica Historical Society previously stored Ocean Shore Rail Car number 1409 at the city's Calera Creek Water Recycling Plant until 2019, and the rail car is currently stored at the Value Mart Shopping Center. The current proposal involves the relocation of the rail car to the site at 1910 Francisco Boulevard, temporary installation, and minor restoration work of the rail car, including work on the roof, windows, and painting. The parking lot is city-owned and contains 30 parking spaces. The rail car proposes to occupy a portion of the parking spaces on the existing drive aisle and will create a temporary drive aisle. The rail car will be stored under a tent and be surrounded by fencing. With the rail car and the temporary construction facing area associated with the Civic Center renovation, the lot will maintain 15 open spaces. There are no permanent site changes proposed. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission find the project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, approve a temporary use permit TUP-1-22 and coastal development permit CDP-445-22 by adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A, and incorporate all maps and testimony into the record by reference. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much. Do any commissioners have questions? Commissioner Wright.
Quick question. I was wondering what the consideration for the shorter hours was, why it is that you limited them to 9 to 5, something other than the typical construction hours where it's more likely to impact the commute?
Commissioner, that was the time that was proposed by the Pacific Historical Society.
Thank you.
All right. Not seeing any other questions. I think let's open the public comment.
Chair Hauser, there is no dial-in comment at this time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Does the applicant have a presentation?
Good evening. This is Kathleen Manning, President Emeritus of the Pacifica Historical Society. We just have a few words to say about our wonderful railroad car. We have owned this railroad car since 2004. Hey, I'm tired. At the time, we realized what a fabulous opportunity we have because we could acquire the only remaining rolling stock from the Ocean Shore Railway that once traveled on what is now Highway 1. We could not pass it up because we knew we'd never get another chance, and we knew that all California train buffs would want the car, as well as all the coastal cities. The significance is that it created our town. Stops became villages, eventually neighborhoods in Pacifica, such as Rockaway, Valleymar. Why it's taken so long? Well, in 2004, we started restoring the Little Brown Church. We saved that 1909 building from the Wreckers Ball, and with a lot of hard work and fundraising, turned it into a fine museum and a fine meeting place. Took us 10 years. So we put the train on the back burner, and volunteers worked on it over at Shamrock Ranch. They did much of the basic work. Then after the museum was finished, we turned to the train. We have had to move it 2 additional times. We have been fundraising with rummage sales, hobo lunches, tours, etc. Our vision is that we want it to be a showpiece, visible from Highway 1 where it once moved down the coast. Eventually, we'll fill it with exciting displays and interactive devices. Today, we need permission to move it to the southwest corner of the lot. We have a contractor, Bob Azzaro, skilled workers. We have the services of a pro bono architect, Bob Bowles. We will use no electricity because Bob says they will be using all battery-operated tools, and they're going to do a lot of off-site work. We will make sure it's secure with a tent and a chain-link fence while we finish the outside work. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any public comments? I don't see any comment cards. Okay.
And Shirley has some pictures that she'd like to distribute.
Thank you. And while these pictures are being distributed, I'll just remind folks that
Thank you.
if you'd like to speak, thank you. If you'd like to speak on this item, please press *5 to raise your hand, and staff will call on you. Do we have any callers, Mr. Lynn? All right.
Sure.
All right. Last call for callers.
Chair Hauser, there are no dial-in comments at this time.
Okay. Well, thank you. With that, I'm going to close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission. Does anyone have questions or deliberations? Oh, Commissioner Leal.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple questions for the applicant, actually, at this time. My first question is, it's currently, as mentioned, it's currently on the Valleymar neighborhood. I'm curious as to the current timelines for it remaining there, and if there's any timing that the commission should take into consideration of whether the rail car needs to be moved from that location in a specific time frame.
Well, yes, we are currently negotiating a contract for moving it, and probably by the end of February, it'll be moved.
Okay, and does that have to be moved because the current site is no longer available, or what's the
Well, right,
driver there?
the owners, the Pereira family, we have like we leased it, Shirley, what, 2 years? We leased it originally for 2 years, then we extended it another year, and then we extended it some more months. But they want to do something else, I guess, with the property.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And then my second question is there an estimated time of when it would be, the renovation would be completed? Is there a timeline that you're thinking?
Well, we hope to have the exterior completed by the time the Civic Center is completed, so that we can move it then to after the workers have left the Civic Center project, then we'll be able to move it to the front of corner of the lot at Salata and Francisco.
Okay, thank you. That answered my third question in terms of the kind of final desired location.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other? I did have one more question for the applicant, sorry. So I think my first question was the final location, which it sounds like is the obvious corner. What does the tent look like, the temporary tent?
Well, actually, we have it up already. If you've seen the car behind Valleymar Station, that's what it'll be the same tent.
The same tent, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any deliberation? Okay. Any motion makers?
I would like to amend it so that they're able to do their work during normal construction hours.
I think that's fair. Was everyone able to hear that? Will you restate that, Commissioner Wright?
I would like to amend it to state that you're allowed to do your work during normal construction hours.
Oh, thank you.
Not limiting you to 9 to 5.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ferguson and then Commissioner Leal.
I have nothing related to deliberate. I'm ready to make a motion on this one if
Commissioner Leal.
there's no further deliberation from the council. Go ahead.
Go ahead. What? You have deliberation? Okay, Commissioner Leal.
Okay. So I just wanted to raise this to my fellow commissioners. So when we approved the Civic Center renovation project, there is a parking requirement of 50 spaces. At the time, it took that lot into consideration of 30 spaces. The reduction of the spaces for this rail car, at least in the temporary use, reduces it by 15, which reduces that to 39. So that reduces that project's parking availability to 39 under the required 50 that we approved that project for. I raised that because I wanted to just bring that to the commission's attention for consideration, given that part of Francisco is impacted by parking at different times, that putting this, although it's planned temporary, but ultimately permanently, temporary for up to 18 months, and then permanently that, frankly, I think at least from a temporary standpoint, this may not be the best location. Personally, I've had this belief for quite a while, and I believe the site's been studied, but in my opinion, there's probably a location that could better equip the needs, at least from a temporary standpoint, which is right adjacent to this property, the former wastewater treatment plant. I know that may not be the desired spot, but given that the rail car will need to be moved again to its final location once everything is completed, I think perhaps the cost would need to be absorbed anyways of another move. So those are my comments. Curious as to what my fellow commissioners think on those points, but I think there might be better options for this rail car.
Commissioner Wright.
In thinking about that, would you be happy if we asked the petitioner to consider the problems that that presents and consider the alternate location. Apparently, they have a month worth of time to try to figure out if that's something that's doable. Is just their consideration sufficient for you to satisfy your concern? Or do you need are you seeking something more?
I think I'm seeking something more, actually. I think it temporarily, it should probably be located in our, in the city-owned lot here, on this, or adjacent to this property. For clarification, the former wastewater treatment plant. I think given that it is temporary, that given the needs of the access as well as the time, as well as space, I feel like the same needs can be met at that location without impacting parking, at least, well, albeit temporarily, and will give us more time when the final plans come out for the final location to study that further. My concern is that we haven't even finished the Civic Center project, and so parking impact related to that is unknown, and we're going to further reduce that parking in that area. And I know many of my fellow neighbors in West Sharp Park are already have concerns around parking. So,
Commissioner Leal, at this point, I think I'm going to ask staff to weigh in here. This has been analyzed, and I think it's an appropriate question.
Chair Hauser, so Commissioner Leal is correct that the temporary use permit does allow for extensions, 2 extensions of up to 6 months. As written in condition number 1 of the draft resolution, that requires that, let me get this right, the circumstances considered during the initial project approval have not materially changed. In the event that the circumstances have materially changed, the Planning Commission shall consider the request for an extension. So that does allow the applicant, if the parking requirements, if the Civic Center is open and the parking requirements are different than they currently are at this point, they will need to come back in front of this body to request that extension.
Ms. Manning, I think as the applicant, I'd like you to also weigh in on the answer to this question.
I thought that the number of parking places required for places was recently eliminated statewide because they want to encourage people to not drive places so often. Is that true? Wasn't there some kind of ordinance passed by the state that changed the number of parking places required?
Right, I'm not aware that those would apply to this particular application. Chair Hauser, what I can say from the city staff perspective related to alternatives is that the city has not offered any other city-owned property for this purpose. And so the question for the commission is whether or not to approve this particular location or to make modifications through conditions in some way relative to what's proposed here. If those conditions are not agreeable to the city as property owner, we may not ultimately allow the rail car to be placed here. The thinking from the staff in supporting this was the parking spaces are not particularly needed right now while the Civic Center is under renovation. Allowing the placement of the car in this location would minimize future logistical challenges and costs to relocating to the potential permanent location at the other corner of the parking lot. Admittedly, that's subject to future consideration and city approval, not only as property owner relative to the specific proposal, but also through a coastal development permit and likely a use permit, and potentially other permits. So there is another opportunity to consider the long-term appropriateness of this particular use. But in a broader neighborhood context, the long-term utilization of this lot with a historic resource of this significance of the Ocean Shore Railroad, which is instrumental to the history of Pacifica, in close proximity to the Pacifica Coastside Museum as well at the Little Brown Church, really reinforces the historic fabric and character of the West Sharp Park neighborhood and would be consistent with policies in the Sharp Park Specific Plan, the LCLUP, and the general plan that all promote city efforts to preserve, retain, and improve historic resources in Pacifica. So those are the reasons that, on balance, the staff recommends approval of this particular set of permits. As with every application, you hear me say all the time, there are trade-offs. It's not optimal, but we think it is satisfactory and desirable in this instance.
Okay. Is there any sort of legal issue with the Civic Center approval that the city went through and the parking spaces? I mean, what I'm understanding, Mr. Murdoch, is that staff has analyzed this, and because it's a temporary permit, there isn't an impact to parking that's anticipated. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. I'm not aware of any legal issues.
Okay. Any further deliberation or pickup of?
Also to take into consideration, the architects that designed the Civic Center were very much in favor of the railroad car being placed on the lot, and they think that's a great part of the Civic Center. And in a visible place where it could be seen from Highway 1, I think it'll be a tourist attraction as well as being a thing of beauty.
Chair, I think what the applicant's referring to is during the Civic Center project process, a conceptual plan that could include a rail car in this location, not the proposed location, but on the other end of the parking lot, the potential permanent location, was conceptualized just to demonstrate whether or not that lot could function and what a potential placement would look like. Yes, it's likely that some number of spaces would be reduced if a permanent installation was to be approved and constructed. That's a decision that the Planning Commission would need to make as part of a future permitting process. It is true that our assessment for the general temporary nature, whether it's the 6-month term or 1 or 2 extensions, it's not likely to present a long-term adverse parking impact through this set of permits. And then the question would be open to future discussion and analysis for a future long-term installation and those potential parking impacts.
Okay, I appreciate the clarifications by everyone. I think this, maybe needs a little bit more deliberation, but for whatever it's worth, personally, I'm comfortable with staff's recommendation. So I don't know. Does anyone else have comments? Okay. Well, then we're back to, does somebody want to make a motion? Commissioner Ferguson.
I move that the Planning Commission find the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act and approve temporary use permit TUP-1-22 and CDP-445-22 by adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval, Exhibit A, and incorporate all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
Is there a second? Commissioner Wright.
I'll second the motion.
All right, let's vote, please.
And that motion passes unanimously. Before moving on, I did just want to call out, I didn't speak up sooner with respect to Commissioner Wright's proposed amendment. I didn't hear that as part of the final motion, so I don't know if.
Uh-oh.
They can do that.
We can
So
we can modify the approval.
Motion. Yeah.
I'd like to make a suggestion that we modify the thing we just approved to normal construction hours.
Will the maker of the motion accept the modification?
Yes.
All right, let's revote.
That motion passes unanimously with the modification to the construction hours.
Thank you. All right, congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the last item of the last hearing on tonight's agenda, file number 2021, construction of an approximately 3,475 square foot, one-story, single-family residence with a 1,320 square foot attached garage on a 1.277 acres undeveloped lot known as Lot 5, Ohlone Point subdivision, also known as Harmony at 1 subdivision, APN 022-150-490. May we have a staff report, please?
Let me pull up your slides. Sorry.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Stephanie Cervantes, Senior Planner with the Planning Division, and I will be presenting item 4 on tonight's agenda, file number 2021-019. The project site has a general plan designation of open space, agricultural, residential, and a zoning designation of planned development and hillside preservation district. The site has access from Ohlone Drive, and the major cross streets are Roberts Drive and Flassler Avenue. The project site was originally subdivided in 2007 as part of the Harmony at 1 subdivision project, now known as the Ohlone Point subdivision. The project was reviewed and approved as a master plan development with individual lots intended for single-family custom homes. As part of the 2007 approval, the city certified an environmental impact report. The proposed project includes construction of a single-story, single-family residence with an attached garage. The project will meet all development standards, including the maximum hillside preservation district coverage allowance and parking standards. The applicant proposes some modifications from the original 2007 approval, including a change to the building footprint, which extends to the south of the original building envelope. Here's a proposed site plan for the project. The home is designed with 3 wings around an outdoor deck. The applicant proposes a wide driveway that will be used to accommodate vehicles up to the garage and also accommodate open guest parking. The applicant proposed an eco-cautious building that blends into the natural surroundings. The proposed landscape will restore native grasslands and plant additional trees. As previously mentioned, the project proposed to change the development footprint. This exhibit shows the 2007 building envelope in red compared to the proposed development footprint. The certified final environmental impact report contained a number of mitigation measures intended to reduce potentially significant environmental impacts to less than significant. One of those measures addressed potential aesthetic impacts. Because the project deviated from this mitigation measure, staff prepared an addendum with the primary focus on visual impacts that may result from the relocation of the original footprint. The analysis performed found that there will be no significant impacts with the proposed modifications to the development plan, to the development area. The applicant contacted city staff today regarding the draft conditions of approval and has agreed to a change to condition number 4. As stated, the project shall comply with all applicable conditions of approval from the Ohlone Point subdivision letter dated November 27, 2007, including but not limited to condition number 27 that reads, as proposed by the applicant, all new buildings shall be designated and constructed to attain all necessary points to achieve LEED certification and shall seek to obtain a gold standard whenever possible. The applicant has raised this issue pertaining to an additional condition number 10, which was related to the green rating building system. The additional change will be detailed by the applicant during their presentation. At this time, staff recommends approval of the proposed project and recommends that the Planning Commission adopt the addendum to the Harmony at 1 Roberts Road subdivision final EIR and approve specific plan SP-175-21 by adopting the resolution included as attachment A to the staff report, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A of the resolution with the following change to Condition 4 to state the project shall comply with all applicable conditions of the approval from the Alone Point subdivision letter dated November 27, 2007, including but not limited to condition number 27, which states, as proposed by the applicant, all the new buildings shall be designed and constructed to attain all necessary points to achieve LEED certification and shall seek to obtain a gold standard whenever possible. Thank you. I'm available for questions. And as previously mentioned, the applicant also has a presentation.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for staff before we open the public hearing and hear from the applicant and the public? I did have, no questions? Okay. I did have one. I just wanted to go through the HPD calculations. I see that it's consistent, so if we could just, this has been something that we've talked about so much in the past, I think it would be worth it to discuss it here.
Commissioner or Chair Hauser, 1 second while I pull up my staff report.
Thank you.
So as part of the project submittal, the applicant did provide the hillside preservation coverage calculation. That calculation did comply with the municipal code requirements, and the calculation found that they are allowed essentially disturbance or structure of 27.5% maximum of the site. And that calculation is based on the site area and the slope of that site. So they are meeting that maximum allowance with 27.5%.
Thank you. Okay. With that, we'll open the public hearing, and if the applicant has a presentation, please come up. And I believe the applicant, Mr. Murdoch, has 10 minutes for their presentation. Is that correct?
Yes, but they may reserve up to 3 minutes for rebuttal, which would reduce their initial presentation to 7 minutes.
So would you like to take the 10 minutes, or would you like to reserve some time for rebuttal, and then staff will let you know kind of when you get to that point?
Do we have to decide that now?
You do, because then they'll cap your time.
Yes.
Let's save time for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, how many minutes would you like? The full 3 minutes?
3.
Okay.
Got it. Good evening, honorable commissioners, planning department staff, and members of the public. My name is Mariana Sanko.
I'm Adam Liebert.
And I want to open our presentation tonight with a very brief personal story, because the reality is that the thing we're talking about tonight is our home where we intend to build our lives. Adam and I both lived in California for a number of years, but never considered it home until we found Pacifica. And it's this place that really caused us to set down roots. We surf here, we mountain bike here, we volunteer at the archery range. We got married here, mostly because we were so in love with this place that we wanted to share it with our families. And so as we thought about how to set down more stable roots, we're currently in a long-term rental in Sharp Park. We found the Ohlone Drive land and fell deeply in love with the land, with the construct of an eco-conscious project, with really appreciating the ancestral origins of this land and the native landscape that it lies in. And so it was so important for us from the outset to design a home that would be environmentally friendly, low profile, nestled in the hillside such that it would not be visible from the majority of town. And that's really what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, I think this is one of the main deviations as shown, and so that's what we'll focus on, but we're happy to field questions on other things. When we came across the land, one of the things we noticed early on was that the EIR's originally approved build pads were right on top of the ridgeline. And you can see that just when you walk up there, and you can see it on the maps.
And that made us sad and a little confused, honestly, because we thought that the goal here was to preserve the ridge lines and to not build on top of them. So we were a little confused about what to do because we wanted to move the house off of the ridge top, but we knew that would trigger an EIR and a bunch of, back and forths. But we chose what we thought was the right thing, which is to move the house forwards off of the ridgeline. And so you can see outlined in black, the original EIR approved build pad, which is the top of the ridgeline is in red. It goes right through that. The topo lines and the slope angle shading show you that the actual ridge top is through that original build pad, and we moved the home down the hillside to try to lower the home and nestle it into the hillside to avoid what is called skylining the ridge, right? When you look up at a ridge, you want to see the natural contours of the ridge. You don't want to see silhouettes of, rectangular homes or anything like that. And so we made this change, and then additionally, we lowered the home. And so we buried it significantly into the ground with a lot of cut, but we're not redistributing that as fill anymore because we want to minimize the disturbance on the land. So we'll be trucking that off, which is unfortunate, but we think that this is the way to reduce the visual impact of the home. And so you can see that the original envelope, which is in red, allows for and was approved for the home to be 29 feet above the ridgetop. And our proposed home, by moving it forwards and burying it in, is only 13 feet above the ridgetop. And so we think that's a huge improvement. And then after that, just to confirm that what we did we think was right, because it's hard to visually understand these things from various viewpoints, we prepared an extensive Google Maps, Google Earth computed study from 26 different viewpoints in town, north and south. I think one thing in the past is that it's often only been considered from the south, but we care about all of town. And one thing we noticed is that the originally approved build pad, the home that is allowed, is actually visible all the way from Muscle Rock. And so you can see the little bit of pink there. That's the original envelope. More prominently, Sunset Ridge School in Fairmont, you can see the original envelope in pink, but you can't see the proposed home in green. And so we're showing these viewpoints from the north, which were not included in the environmental impact report, which only looked at viewpoints from the south. From North Rockaway Beach, you can see a huge amount of the originally approved envelope, but you can't see our home at all because we moved it off of the ridgetop and nestled it into the hillside.
For reference, the blue is the approved Lot 3 home that's currently being constructed.
Just to know what that is, because I don't label it, I'm sorry. From Rockaway, again, it's another place where if we stick to the originally approved plans, you can see the home, but you can't see our proposed home. And then from Fassler Ave, huge difference. You can see a little bit of our home in green as we've proposed it, but you can see way more of the original envelope. And then the photorealistic rendering to scale from Soul Grind, you can really barely see anything. And one thing that's nice is that regardless of what we build, there's the ridgeline behind it, the kind of silhouettes. So our home is minimally impactful from the south. And then the city had a consultant do the independent visual study, and they found equal or less severity of impact with this move, and said what we did would minimize visual impact of the proposed building and remain less significant. And so I think really what this presentation goes to show is that we really prioritize minimizing the visual impact of our home. And we know it's a change from what the original approval is, but we think it's actually maybe not well to the letter of what was approved, actually to the intent, because we think it better ensures the intentions of the public. Separately,
With our remaining minute.
yeah, there is in the original harmony conditions of approval, there was condition of approval number 27, which is that you'd build a home per lead and strive for gold, and we've been planning for that all along. We're really excited to do that. We chose this development because it's eco-friendly, and so we want to stick with that, and we asked for that to be included in draft resolution number 4, so that's what was presented. The other thing that we're addressing here, though, is that draft resolution number 10 was added. We saw it for the first time just 4 days ago. It talks about also achieving 100 points on the Green Point rating scale, which is a competing rating system. And this was a surprise to us. It's the first time we've seen it as a requirement. We don't know where it comes from. We don't see any analysis saying that it's beneficial. In reading about LEED and Green Point rating system, LEED is more strict and more renowned. And so having the green point is just another competing set. I actually found precedent of them having competing requirements, so it's just very confusing. We'd love to stick with just the original Harmony condition of approval of LEED, which we think is clear, and we'll follow that without having to add draft resolution number 10.
Thank you. All right. So I have 2 comment cards up here. By way of reminder, if you're on the phone, to raise your hand, you can dial *5. And so the first speaker is Aaron Royston, followed by Dinah Verby.
Thank you guys for the time. I just want to, as a resident of Pacifica, just say I'm extremely supportive of this. I think we're all lucky to have such a conscientious and thoughtful couple building on new land here. As a short anecdote, as I got to know Adam and Mariana when they first bought this land, they immediately had an ecologist come onto the site and assess all vegetation, whether it was native or invasive, and noticed that some of the Monterey pines, had a sickness. I think it was driven by beetles, and pretty much, assessed every way they could use methods to restore those pines. And so I think that just kind of shows the authenticity of a lot of their comments. And I think if we have people building on new land here, it's sort of an ideal outcome for all of us to have such thoughtful folks. Pacific obviously means the world to them, and everything they say about preserving sight lines and some of the ecology of the area is genuine.
Thank you. Dinah Verby. And that is the last speaker card I have.
Yes, hi, Dinah Verby again. I had asked Director Murdoch to distribute some documents, and I hope you all had them. These are all taken from the EIR and the draft EIR, which are on the city's website, but they're not in the packet. And the first one that I distributed, and I provided one for the applicant as well, shows the depiction of that prominent ridge line on the first page. And then the page behind it has the actual lot layout with the prominent ridge line showing that it goes right through the middle of Lot 5. Again, these are all in the EIR. The other handout contains language from the EIR which showed the intent for the placement of the building envelope, which was to avoid the prominent ridge line. And that policy is starting at page 3-2 of the draft EIR. And it says under community design element that the development standards would keep open the steep slopes and the visually prominent ridge lines. The land use element says ridge lines visually prominent shall be protected from residential and commercial development. Now, I'm very appreciative of the applicant's efforts to minimize the visual impact. And I'm not sure if there is, how much of a factual dispute there is about where that ridge line really is. Page 3-9 of the EIR that I distributed, under the land use element, it says that the project site contains ridge lines highly visible and that it conforms to the land use element policies because it was designed to protect the ridge lines so that the homes would be sited outside of the prominent ridgeline designation areas, and that is shown in figure 10 of the handout that I gave you. So the concern here is that there's city policy and a lot of intention behind keeping the homes off the ridge lines. And in furtherance of that, the newly updated general plan actually has as one of its policies protection of the ridge lines. And so I just want to be sure that a lot of thought is given to this deviation, because it's clear that relocating this property, this building, will take it further onto the prominent ridge line. And so, is that my time? Okay,
Yes,
sorry.
that's your time. Thank you, Ms. Verby. Mr. Lin, do we have any callers?
Chair Hauser, there are no dial-in comments at this time.
Okay, we're going to give 30 seconds, and then we'll invite the applicant back up for a rebuttal. Mr. Lin? All right. If you would like to come back up, you are welcome to.
I think we'd just like to open with a note of appreciation and thanks, and honestly complete agreement with Ms. Verby's comment that we would like to minimize our visibility on the prominent ridgeline, and we think that the map doesn't appropriately signify and delineate where the prominent ridgeline actually is, and we may just be in this weird topology land, which Adam can speak to.
Yeah, so mapping is actually one of my things. So when I got that, if you look at the handout, it was a hand-drawn map, very far zoomed out, which was then at some point transcribed onto a different map. And in that process, we think that somehow the prominent ridgeline just didn't really end up where the prominent ridgeline area didn't actually end up on the ridgeline. And so the bottom image here is from the visual study document that we submitted in our planning application a year ago. And if you look at the contour lines, and if you look at the slope angle shading, it's clear that that white area is the lowest slope, that is the top of the ridgeline. And you can even see that the person who did the topography, the survey, mapped the road. And if you've ever gone up on this ridge, people drive right up on top of the ridge line. You drive on the ridge. And so you can see that where it writes on ridge top, that is the actual prominent ridge line. And the area that's circled is actually below the ridgeline. So we're trying to move the home off of the ridgetop into this drawn area that's called the prominent ridgeline area. But if you look at the maps, it's not actually the ridgetop.
Yeah, the drawn-in area does not accurately represent the actual sight lines of the land, and you can both see that if you're up there on the dirt road, or just looking at any image and looking at how the building envelopes are actually sited.
Yeah, and I think the visual study, regardless of what you think is or is not the ridgetop, the visual study we presented, and we have that document with 26 exhibits, should show you, I think, that what we're doing is just fundamentally lower visible impact from both the north and the south. So we're hoping that this is pretty cut and dry, and it was a scary move because we know that we're now in this box that says prominent ridgeline, but we think that we're doing the actual right thing per the intent of what the original, plan was, and yeah. Any other thoughts?
I'll make one final comment, which is our architect, James Cutler of Cutler Anderson Architects, which is a world-renowned firm for building eco-conscious, subtle homes, almost didn't agree to take on this project with us, despite his love for this land and the vision of us building an eco-conscious home, because he was so concerned about where the original building envelope was subscribed. And he said that there's basically just no way to make a subtle home on that lot envelope, and requested, and we likewise agreed with him, that we would all be better off, all of us in Pacifica, by having a home that, doesn't stick out like a box on the ridgetop. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll close the public comment period. Any questions for the applicant or staff? All right, well, I'll go. Mr. Murdoch, would you like to make some clarifications?
Yes, I would like to offer some thoughts for the commission to consider. First off, with respect to the applicant's request about the Greenpoint rating system, no objection from staff if the commission opted to strike condition number 10, as the applicants requested. They have accurately relayed the fact that the original Harmony at 1 approvals only talk about achieving LEED certification and or points sufficient for LEED certification and essentially striving to achieve gold where possible. With respect to the Greenpoint rating system, that was just a practical addition from staff to reflect some of the prior approvals in the Harmony at 1 subdivision, beginning with Lot 2, I believe, in 2015. That project was appealed to City Council, and the outcome of the appeal was to include, I believe, both. But in any case, the applicant at that time had proposed the Greenpoint rating system as an equivalent. I don't believe the City Council accepted that. In any case, the outcome of the appeal of Lot 3, which was also appealed to City Council, was to require both LEED Gold and Greenpoint rating, 100 points. The applicant in that case agreed to that, and so it was just to achieve consistency, but there's no basis in the original project approvals for the Greenpoint rating system, and again, no objection from staff to eliminate condition number 10 if the commission sees fit. I do have a number of points and thoughts to share with respect to the prominent ridgeline. I'll need just a moment to bring up a visual here. So there are a number of considerations with respect to the prominent ridgeline. I think on its face, I agree with the applicant's assessment that someone took a very crude, city-wide or neighborhood-wide scale prominent ridgeline drawing and plopped it onto a scaled subdivision map and said that's where the prominent ridgeline is. Yeah. I don't think there's any evidence to support that that's actually where the prominent ridgeline is. The applicant was articulate in explaining, or the applicants were their evidence. Staff concurs entirely with that assessment. As a professional planning practitioner and someone who's administered the prior general plan for approaching 8 years, or approaching 9 years actually, time flies, I will tell you that the prominent ridgeline level of specificity in the 1980 general plan, which was used purportedly to identify the prominent ridgeline in the original Harmony approvals, is meant to indicate that there is a sensitive ridgeline resource in that vicinity and to take careful care when reviewing a project. I don't know, and I can't substitute my judgment in 2023 for the judgment of the city in the 2007-2008 timeframe, but I think where I sit today, there's no way to conclude that the prominent ridgeline is where it was depicted in the tentative map and in the EIR. And so I think you shouldn't base new decisions on bad information that informed old decisions, in my opinion. So in that sense, I think the commission should consider how much weight to put on the prominent ridgeline location where it was previously. To supplement that, here is the Harmony at 1 subdivision. This is the project site, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lot 5. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but I'll show in the next slide. You can see the contours, and just as the applicants demonstrated, I think in any plain language interpretation of what a ridgeline is, which is the top of a topographical feature, the ridgeline is across the upper portions of the lots where the city council approved them. And additionally, the approved building locations pursuant to the final EIR were flowing right from the top of the lots down onto the most prominent portions of the ridgelines. So to whatever extent the city council considered where the prominent ridgeline was or visual impacts at that time, they approved the lots and the building locations of the lots in the most prominent portions of the ridgelines, closest to the top of the ridgeline, with the greatest disruption of the natural ridgeline contours. I think there's overwhelming evidence to conclude that the ridgelines, the prominent ridgeline was not properly identified and that the original locations were more impactful than alternative locations. And then I'll conclude by pointing you to the addendum to the EIR, starting on packet page 162, where the visual analyses were performed. So even if you take the public testimony about the prior draft and final EIR analyses at face value, we have done the supplemental analysis required by CEQA, where there is a potential deviation from the prior analysis. As long as there's not a potentially new significant impact, a CEQA addendum is appropriate. And so we've developed with substantial evidence, including the visual simulations on packet page 162, that even if those locations were the appropriate locations, which I contend they're not based on substantial evidence also supports a conclusion that the proposed project would be less impactful than the previously approved projects. 2 key points on that. One, again, the significant topography that's at the top of the sites where these building locations were approved, and then the allowable height of up to 29 feet for the original project approvals. We have visual simulations that show what a 29-foot building would look like in the original approved locations relative to the single-story, less than 29-foot high proposed structure would be in the alternate location. I think it's obvious on its face that they are the proposed project is less visually impactful on the ridgeline location and the aesthetic condition of that area. So thank you for entertaining my observations and thoughts and the evidence that staff used to inform its analysis and recommendations on the project.
Thank you, Director Murdoch. All right. Any questions? I have a question for the applicant. I would just love a little bit more information on the eco-conscious ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. I am an early stage investor that is my entire career in life is focused on investing in technologies that make the world a better place and don't prey on human frailty and further our capacity to live in a sustainable manner on this planet. It's something that is so core to us. I'll let Adam speak to how he came to a similar mindset, but it was actually one of the reasons why we decided to build a new home in Pacifica, loving it as much as we do, and knowing that this would be a non-trivial process, was we looked at a lot of the existing properties and recognized that to live in a home to the standard of the ethos that we care about, for example, having rainwater harvesting and catchment systems, to have an entirely native grassland landscape to really honor the beauty that is this place, it would be nearly infeasible to do that on the majority of the available existing properties, and we saw this as an opportunity. And so what I think for many people scared away people from building on this land and in this development was actually the thing that drove us to it, was the fact that there's a requirement for these homes to be eco-conscious, and that's something that we're deeply inspired by and driven to.
Yeah, we're really excited to have neighbors who believe in that as well. I'm an engineer. I work in climate now, trying to find sustainable, clean energy pathways for the world. One of the things that we actually, one of the journeys we took with this home was just the name of the road that it's on, which is Ohlone Drive. And we at first honestly didn't know what that was, didn't know how to pronounce it, and then we realized like the Ohlone were the native people here. And I think we were a little unsure about how to feel about the road being named that and whether there is some appropriation or something. But as we started reading up on it, this is long before we bought the land, we learned who they were, and we bought some books and started reading. Would recommend Braiding Sweetgrass, amazing book, and lots of others, and really fell in love with actually the opportunity to do something that we thought was good, not just eco-friendly for the world, but maybe even more like of the land, and to plant the native grasses there that were there long before our time. And so that's why one of the first things we did, it was before that we bought the land, but we had Patrick of Coast Ridge Ecology, who lives actually just across the street, come walk the land with us and teach us every species that was on it and how to support their growth and how to mitigate all the invasive fennel and pampas grass and other things.
And one thing I'll add to this broader question, to get back to your question, is that we spend our lives steeped daily in the reality of climate change and trying to understand the mitigations and realities associated with that. And we are not blind to the fact that we are attempting to build a home that will hopefully be a multi-generational home in a coastal area. And I think it's something that we're actually really excited to do, is to think about this home as an entire systems project that is resilient, not just today, but for many generations to come.
Yeah, and so with that, that's single story. We believe in like aging in place. That's one. It being our primary residence, this is not, a commercial foreign investment or anything like that. We live in Pacifica and want to keep living here. And then, of course, like, I'm an engineer, and I won't bore you all with the details of heat pumps and, rainwater collection and solar and batteries and Teslas and whatever. But there's all of that's baked into the project, and I'm super stoked to do all that. Yeah, happy to answer any specific questions.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Deliberation? Oh, Commissioner Wright.
I have a quick question for the applicant as well. I'm very encouraged to hear all the consideration that you've put into all of this. I was wondering if you could expound a little bit more on your water capturing plans. Did you consider future gray water capture? Did you consider setting up for purple pipe for later in case it ever gets there?
Yeah, absolutely. We can speak to that. Adam can speak in finer details. I will say that first and foremost, we're going to complete the project to all of the California water rain harvesting and catchment standards, including designing the entirety of the home for, I believe, a 100-year storm.
Yeah,
which is a separate thing, but the drainage, right? So we're considering all of that, and so Adam can talk to specifics.
So one of the interesting things about rainwater catchment, I think that's one where philosophically we love it. It's actually quite hard to economically prove it out or to show that it makes a lot of sense in areas like California where you got a ton of rain during a very short season and then a long dry season. So the size of the gray water collection or the rainwater collection tank that you'd need to actually capture all the rain during rainy season and have it last you through the summer is way more land than you want us to disturb with the Hillside Preservation District. So we're going for a good middle ground, a feasible something so that we can do a best effort to use the rainwater catchment to water our landscaping, right, which is quite minimal. It's native grasses. Hopefully by the time they're actually settled in place, we don't really have to water them at all. But there are some coastal live oak trees, and it's unclear how much water they'll need. But generally, the rainwater catchment is, I think it's 1,500 gallons, and so there's that. As for gray water, we're planning on it. It's another one where if you look at the carbon footprint of building a gray water system and the plastics and the this and the that, it actually is hard to show that it's economically the right thing to do and also environmentally the right thing to do. But philosophically, we love the idea, and so we are planning currently on a gray water system, and it just comes to learning more about whether we think it's the right thing to do versus really trying to minimize our usage through environmentally friendly fixtures and things like that.
And I was also wondering if you were planning on doing any kind of ventilation down underneath the slab to run the air through to cool you in the summer and warm you in the winter having to use energy to do that?
Great question. Yeah, so we're working closely with this architect and energy and lead firm that will ensure that our home is per, not just Title 24 standards, but above and beyond that. And so I think that's what LEED Gold helps to ensure. There are a variety of different methods for that. Radiant heating in the floor has been shown to be much more efficient than forced air. And that being provided by a heat pump system is one of the most energy efficient ways to heat or cool your home. And then that heat pump system being powered by the solar on our roof and the batteries should make the home net zero in terms of energy from the grid. And so I think the hope is that if we can just be kind of self-sustaining in terms of how much energy we use, then we feel good about, there's an aesthetic to being kind of net zero like that.
The home is also designed to have natural circulation from clear-story windows in the back on the Ohlone Drive side straight through to the forward-facing windows on the western side.
For air, so getting good clean air through the house and a nice ridgetop breeze, and then as well it'll meet all of the actual air quality requirements that there's energy recovery ventilators, blah blah.
We're deep in the weeds.
Okay. Commissioner Ferguson.
Yeah, I'd like to commend you guys on what I think is a very attractive, very well thought out project. I can appreciate that if we take the assumption that something was going to be on this lot eventually, this is about as good as I could imagine it being. I could tell you from personal experience that a gray water catchment system pans out very quick when watering fruits and vegetables, given the exponential scale of water costs in Pacifica. But if that's not your intention of the water, then maybe it's different. I take a little issue with the bar being, comparing it against the maximum allowable size that could have possibly been on the house, on the lot, versus if you look at, the average size of a home in Pacifica is about 1,300 square feet. So it's a lot of, adulation about how much smaller it is than what could have been, but I don't know if that's actually here. And I personally think the intention of all the environmental red tape on this development was actually to make it prohibitively daunting so that nobody would ever build on it. I think that was very clear, and I've heard that from some of the people that put that red tape in 30 years ago. But that being said, I think what you guys have achieved here is very thoughtful and creative, and I commend all your efforts on the project.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, I think it looks fantastic. And I also commend you going with single story. Aging in place is a really big issue. And I appreciate that you're putting in solar. As far as the condition of approval, I've seen this a lot on projects throughout the Bay Area, and typically it's LEED or Greenpoint rated. There's a choice that's given. And so the way I would do it is I would offer the choice in the condition of approval. And you may find, whatever you want, but you may find that it's more cost efficient to achieve Greenpoint rated.
We would love the choice, but the original conditions of approval said LEED, and if we wanted to, we just know that will lead to an appeal given the history, and so just sticking with the original plan is something we're happy to do. We've actually already been working with the LEED raters, but it does seem like a lot of California is moving towards the Greenpoint system, and I do think that there's good reason to consider that, but we're yeah.
It's a very understandable. Okay, Commissioner Ferguson.
Yeah, I hope someone can direct me to it. I was looking for, because it's a substantial cut. 1,600 cubic yards is like 100 double standard truckloads of dirt hauled off. I couldn't find a rendering of what the subsequent retaining walls might look like, because I presume, I was looking through and I was trying to find what that might look like. The house itself seems to be set low, but I can't tell if it's just the house is filling where the cut was.
Yes.
Or the driveway coming through.
There's no retaining walls really other than the house itself and a little bit of one side of the driveway. It's just that we're sinking the house into that. So this is one where we're trying, we've chosen
the rear wall of the house is your structural retaining wall.
Correct. We've chosen to spend a lot of money to try to sink this home deep into the hillside so that it's not visible from the majority of town. And I think that moving that fill elsewhere on the site would be definitely the economical thing to do and what everyone's recommended to us to do, but we're not trying to just move a whole bunch of dirt around and disturb more of the landscape. So, yeah.
If only there was a place for you to dump your dirt right here in Pacifica.
I've been thinking about that.
Tell us about that quarry project.
All right. Someone have a motion? Okay. Well, then I will make a motion. I move the Planning Commission adopt the addendum to the Harmony at 1 Roberts Road subdivision final EIR and approve specific plan SP-175-21 by adopting the resolution included as attachment A to the staff report, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A of the resolution with the amendment to the condition that we discussed regarding LEED certification and not Greenpoint rating. And that is it. Is there a second? Commissioner Godwin.
I will second that motion. I think it's a fantastic project.
Let's all vote. Congratulations.
That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for the long evening.
All right. Moving on to commission communications. Any commission communications? Okay. Staff communications.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening again. Commissioners, Planning Director Christian Murdoch. First, I want to announce for the public, the Planning Commission will participate in a joint study session with the City Council on Monday, January 23rd, beginning at 5:30 p.m. to discuss the economic opportunities study that the city's consultant has prepared. It's an important culmination of an effort by the city to evaluate potential economic opportunity or economic development opportunities across the city, and particularly as they relate to land use development opportunities, which is the primary reason that the joint study session with the Planning Commission is so important to the City Council. Next, I want to welcome Associate Planner James Lynn to his first Planning Commission meeting.
Welcome.
He joined the city's Planning Department team in December, and so we're thrilled to have him. I'll give him an opportunity to maybe share a little bit about his planning background and why we were so interested in hiring him for the team. But then lastly, on the staffing note, it is with a heavy heart that I announced this was Bonnie O'Connor's last Planning Commission meeting. Senior Planner O'Connor has provided notice. She's leaving for another agency in a non-planning role, and her last day will be this Friday, January 20th. I just want to offer my sincere thanks to Bonnie on behalf of the department and the city for years of tremendous work and really meaningful impact on the planning department and important issues in the city, not least of which her major contribution to leading the local coastal land use plan update process and all of the twists and turns that that process took throughout the years to get that done. And so we will be forever grateful, or at least 40 years grateful as it goes in Pacifica with some of these plans, for her efforts to get that plan adopted and all of the other things that the commission and the community will never see, the tireless nights, working on deadlines, working weekends, sacrificing family time, the things that it takes to get this job done very often in Pacifica. And so thank you, Bonnie.
Well, she will be missed. Mr. Lynn, do you want to give us a little?
Thank you, Director Murdoch, for the warm welcome. Commissioners, I graduated from UCSB with a degree in environmental studies, and following that, I spent just about 3 years, both experiences working as a planning consultant, and then most recently, I was a municipal planner with the County of Madera. So I'm happy to have moved to Pacifica and started this, my planning journey here. And thank you. Looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, before we finish, I'm going to read this. Anyone aggrieved by the action of the Planning Commission has 10 calendar days to appeal the decision in writing to the City Council. If any of the above actions are challenged in court, issues which may be raised are limited to those raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Judicial review of any city administrative decision may be had only if a petition is filed with the court not later than the 90th day following the date upon which the decision becomes final. Judicial review of environmental determinations may be subject to a shorter time period for litigation, in certain cases 30 days following the date of the final decision. And with that, is there a motion for adjournment? Commissioner Leal.
I'll make a motion to adjourn
There is
tonight's
a second.
meeting.
Commissioner Wright seconds the motion. All vote, please. We are
And
adjourned.
that motion passes unanimously.
All right, thanks, everybody.
It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.